Welcome back, brothers, to Amalur. Tonight's story, we have to return the Primarch Vulkan, Primarch of the Salamanders. Before we get into the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been absolutely killing it. Now, let's get to the madness.
The dead forge moon of Karan Vulkanis did not answer its masters. It had been built to scream. For 8,000 years, its manufactorum continents had howled without pause, disgorging munitions, armor plate, plasma coils, void ship ribs, promethium caskets, gun servitors, and sanctified engine parts for wars it would never see. Its atmosphere had been a permanent storm of soot and furnace glow. Its oceans had long ago boiled away, replaced by cooling basins of chemical sludge and lakes of waste metal. Its mountains had been carved hollow and filled with machine choirs. Its cities had no homes, only dormitory vaults, ration chapels, work crypts, punishment squares, and furnace shrines where men were taught that exhaustion was devotion and pain was proof of loyalty. Billions had labored there. Billions had prayed there. Billions had gone silent in a single night. No distress call had escaped. No astropathic scream had reached the wider Imperium. No Binharic lament had bled through the noosphere. The forge moon simply ceased to speak, and in the Imperium of man silence was rarely emptiness. Silence was conspiracy. Silence was death. Silence was the moment before a blade entered the spine. The strike cruiser Argent Edict tore free of the Empyrean, with its Geller field still bleeding witchlight across its hull. Warp frost cracked from its adamantium flanks. Hexagrammic wards flared along its armor like silver scars. Its engines roared awake in real space, each plasma heart igniting with restrained fury, while its prow came about toward the corpse glow of Karan Vulkanis. Brother Captain Malachor Voss stood upon the command dais beneath the cathedral vault of the bridge, unmoving as the ship shuddered around him. He wore warplate of polished silver, every surface engraved with wards, names, litanies, and blades of scripture, too small for mortal eyes to read. His helm rested beneath one arm. His face was severe, blunt, and pale from a lifetime spent beneath Titan's hidden skies. Ritual scars crossed his scalp, where purity seals had once been burned into flesh. His eyes were grey, but not the grey of age or softness. They were the grey of ash, after a pyre had done its work. Around him stood the bridge serfs of the Grey Knights, hooded, branded, mind-chained, and oath-bound unto death. They did not look at him unless ordered. They did not speak unless spoken to. Even their terror had been disciplined into silence. Beyond the armoured viewing panes, the void was full of ruin. Cathedral ships drifted in pieces, their spires snapped, their stained adamant windows blackened by internal fire. Corpse barges hung open from prow to stern, spilling frozen human bodies in glittering trails that caught the light of the dying moon below. Imperial monitors turned slowly in the dark, their hulls peeled outward, as though something immense had been born inside them and clawed its way free. Defense platforms, once arranged in sacred orbital geometry, had been twisted into obscene shapes. Some had been folded back upon themselves. Others had been threaded with cables of flesh, vast red ropes that pulsed, though there was no air and no warmth to sustain them. Voss watched without expression. "Report," he said. Shipmaster Dalthus, an old void-born thrall with both hands replaced by sanctified brass interfaces, bowed his head. "All local defense assets destroyed, my lord. No active Imperial Vox traffic. No Mechanicus identification returns. Auspex registers mass debris, residual plasma discharge, extensive biological contamination, and continuing energy bloom from beneath the lunar crust." "Biological," said Voss. The word was not a question. "Confirmed, my lord. Organic matter within void wreckage. Organic matter across several orbital structures. Organic matter growing through adamantium." The bridge fell colder. Brother Librarian Severian stood to Voss's right, his warded armor marked by the black script of banishment rites. His eyes were closed. Blood moved from one nostril and trailed into the corner of his mouth, where it dried instantly in the recycled air. "The veil is wounded," Severian said. "Not torn. Wounded. Held open. Fed. There are voices beneath the moon." "How many?" Severian's jaw tightened. 9 dominant presences, each vast, each enthroned, lesser warp signatures beyond counting. Voss turned his gaze back to the moon. Karen Vulkanis filled the viewing panes. Now, a blackened sphere veined with molten orange, its surface crawled with fire. Not the clean light of industry, not the noble fury of a loyal forge. This flame moved like infection. It pulsed through trenches and crater basins. It shuddered in the old manufacturum belts, as if the metal continents had become organs around a diseased heart. 9, Voss said. Severian opened his eyes. "Not a horde, Lord. A conclave." "A council," said Voss. No one answered him. No one needed to. The sealed reliquary mounted upon the command dais opened without mortal hand. Its locks disengaged one by one, each release accompanied by a chime of warding bells. Incense spilled from the inner chamber, silver smoke coiling around Voss's greaves. Within the reliquary rested a black crystal, etched with the sigils of Titan. Its surface had been inert since the Argent Edict had left the hidden moon of Saturn. Now it burned with inner lightning. Every serf on the bridge dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to the deck. The grey knights remained standing. Voss reached into the reliquary and took the crystal in his gauntleted hand. Pain entered him with the delicacy of a knife through the eye. He did not cry out. The bridge vanished. He stood upon a plain of black glass beneath the crust of Karen Vulkanis. Above him hung chains the size of hive towers, each link made from fused skeletons, each skull still mouthing prayers that had become screams. Before him stood 9 thrones. One was brass and running with fresh arterial blood. One was bone and rust, crowned in flies. One was crystal, changing shape each time he tried to see it. One was lacquered flesh stretched tight over ivory. Others flickered and altered, each impossible, each obscene, each heavy with the gravity of damnation. Upon them sat shapes too vast for sight and too intimate for sanity. Wings, horns, crowns, talons, smiles, open bellies, burning eyes, armor made from murdered saints, hands wet with the souls of men. They looked at him. They knew him. They laughed with 9 mouths and one intention. Then he saw the relic. It hung above a chasm in the deepest forge vault, suspended in chains of black iron and living scripture. It was a flame that had forgotten the need for fuel. It burned white, green, and gold all at once. It did not flicker. It judged. Around it, demons capered and shrieked, but none dared touch it. Mortal bodies had been piled beneath it in mountains. Their blood had run into channels carved with runes that hurt the eye. Their bones had been arranged into circles. Their brains had been smeared into script across the floor by claws too delicate to belong to beasts and too cruel to belong to men. A name entered Voss's mind. The Unbound Flame. He returned to himself with his fist clenched around the crystal hard enough to crack its surface. Blood ran from beneath his gauntlet, where the psychic discharge had forced itself through armor and skin alike. Severian looked at him. Titan priority. Voss nodded once. Confirmed. The bridge runes flared crimson. Warning choirs screamed in clipped machine tones. Energy bloom, said Shipmaster Dulthus. Surface weapon systems awakening. Lance batteries, Voss ordered. Surface batteries are not targeting us, my lord. Voss narrowed his eyes. Then what do they target? Dulthus swallowed. Themselves. Karen Vulkanis opened fire upon its own skin. Defense lasers embedded in fortress trenches cut across the moon's surface, slicing manufacturum districts apart. Macro cannon bastions thundered into nearby hive foundries. Missile silos vomited volleys into labor sectors. Plasma reactors were overloaded by remote rites of sabotage. The moon began to mutilate itself in obedience to some buried command. Continents burned brighter. Hab vaults split open. Worker districts collapsed into pits of fire. Through the magnification of the bridge display, Voss saw shapes on the surface. Vast procession lines of bodies, still walking though half of them were aflame. Servitors dragging their own entrails through molten runoff, while their machine limbs continued their assigned work. Militia regiments standing in parade formation, with their heads turned backward, firing laser guns into the mouths of their own officers. Skulls had been welded onto prayer towers by the tens of thousands. Some were still alive enough to scream. "By the throne," a serf whispered. Voss did not look at him. "Remove his tongue after the battle." The serf began to weep silently. "Teleportarium readiness," said Voss. "Chambers sanctified," Dalthus answered. "Brotherhoods await your command." "Orbital insertion?" "Compromised. Surface interference extreme. Warp pressure rising through the crust. Teleportation is possible only by narrow strike window." Then we used the window. Severian turned sharply toward the viewing pane. Voss saw it a heartbeat later. A star was falling. No, not a star. A figure entered the debris field from the far darkness, surrounded by burning wreckage and descending fire. It came without ship, without escort, without heraldry projected across the void. Orbital mines detonated around it, filling the black with blossoms of white fury. Shattered defense platforms fired in panicked machine hatred. Lances cut toward it. Macro shells burst against it. Plasma fire spread in hungry clouds. The figure walked through it. Walked. In the void. Each step found purchase where there was none. Each movement carried the terrible certainty of a myth refusing to remain dead. Fire clung to the giant's armor and did not consume it. It streamed from him in banners. His warplate was the green of deep volcanic glass, edged in gold and blackened by the heat of ancient wars. Scales of drake hide hung from his shoulders. His eyes burned like forge hearts beneath a face that seemed carved not from flesh, but from patience, sorrow, and wrath given human shape. In one hand, he bore a hammer that looked as though it had been made to break mountains. In the other burned a flame that answered the dying moon below. No serf spoke. None dared. Even the grey nights were still. Voss felt the pressure of the being's presence through the ship's wards. It was not demonic. It was not psychic in the manner of sorcerers. It was gene-wrought authority, raised to the scale of legend. It pressed against thought like gravity. It made the old oaths in Voss's bones remember the age when the Emperor's sons had walked among mankind as war gods. Severian's voice was almost a rasp. "Primarch." Voss's hand tightened around the cracked Titan crystal. The figure descended through the last ring of debris. A cathedral ship, drifting blind and burning from within, broke apart in his path. He did not evade it. He passed through the wreckage in a storm of molten metal and shattered statues. The armor around him blazed brighter. Fragments of Saint icons, dead crew, and broken macro cannon housings spun away in his wake. "Identify," Voss said. Dalthus did not hesitate, though his voice trembled. "Genetic and heraldic profile corresponds to Vulkan, Primarch of the 18th Legion, sire of the Salamanders, Lord of Drakes, son of the Emperor." "Corresponds," Voss said. Dalthus bowed his head lower. "My lord, no mortal system aboard this vessel can guarantee truth in the presence of such a being." "That is why we are not mortal," Voss said. He reached for the Vox rune. The channel opened in a burst of static, flame roar, and distant chanting from the tortured moon below. "This is Brother Captain Malachor Voss of the Grey Knights, commanding the Argent Edict by authority of Titan and the Emperor's holy will. Identify yourself." For several heartbeats, there was only fire. Then the voice came, deep, controlled, heavy enough to make the bridge tremble through speakers never designed to carry such presence. "I am Vulkan." Several serfs sobbed. One bit through his own lip to remain silent. Voss stared into the viewing pane as the Primarch turned his burning gaze toward the strike cruiser. "State your purpose," Voss said. A lesser warrior might have made that sound like defiance. Voss made it doctrine. Vulkan did not answer at once. Below him, Karen Vulkanis split along a continental fault. Molten iron bled upward in a wound large enough to swallow a hive city. The light of it painted the Primarch in hellish radiance. "I smell treachery in the iron," Vulkan said. "I hear my father's enemies beneath the stone." Voss felt the bridge listening. He felt the old awe trying to enter his warriors, the seductive gravity of legend. He crushed it within himself. "Legends do not command Titan's sons," he said. "No," Vulkan replied, "nor should they." That answer was not submission. It was worse. It was agreement from something that did not need approval. Voss turned from the viewing pane. "Prepare strike deployment. First Brotherhood to Teleportarium. Paladins to the forward ward line. Purifiers to second wave. Librarians bind the coordinates." Severian looked at him. "And Vulkan?" Voss placed his helm over his head. The auto-senses awakened, flooding his sight with target runes, threat markers, atmospheric data, and the silver litany scroll of his armor's machine spirit. His voice emerged through the Vox grill, cold and metallic. "We verify with blade and ward. If he is true, he will endure suspicion. If he is false, he will burn." No one questioned him. That was the way of the Grey Knights. They did not kneel to hope. They did not trust miracles. They had seen miracles wear the faces of children and open their mouths to vomit flies. They had seen saints split down the middle and become gates for things with too many hands. They had heard the voices of dead brothers begging from demon throats. Faith was not softness. Faith was a weapon. Faith had a killing edge. Voss strode from the bridge, his warriors falling in around him as the Argent Edict sailed into the shadow of the dead Forge moon. Beneath them, Karen Vulkanis continued to bleed. Manufactorum stacks vomited molten metal in reversed rivers. Rail lines made from adamantium ribs carried trains of corpses into furnace mouths that opened and closed like feeding beasts. Flesh had fused into machine lines wherever the curse had taken root. Men were welded to conveyor belts through the spine, their hands still twitching as servo claws forced tools into their fingers. Servitors marched with their skull casings split open, grey matter bubbling around implanted cables while they chanted Binharic hymns in broken voices. Militia commanders hung from Vox towers by their own intestines, still issuing orders through throats packed with ash and teeth. Prayer towers had become forests of skulls. Each skull faced the same direction, downward, toward the thing beneath the crust. The teleportarium of the Argent Edict was a chamber of silver light and black iron, its walls carved with warding script from deck to vaulted ceiling. Grey Knights stood in concentric ranks, storm bolters locked to gauntlets, nemesis force blades held ready, psychic hoods glowing with restrained power. Incense fought the stink of ozone and sanctified oils. Cherub servitors drifted overhead, their eyes sewn shut, their mouths whispering purity canticles. At the center of the chamber, Voss stood upon the primary sigil plate. Severian approached him, helm sealed, halberd in hand. "The surface rejects us," the librarian said. "Coordinates shift. Something below the moon is editing distance. Then anchor upon Vulkan." Severian was silent for a moment. "You would use a Primarch as a teleport beacon. I would use a mountain as cover if it stood between mankind and the warp." "A Primarch is not a mountain." "No," Voss said. "A mountain is easier to trust." The chamber shook. The teleportarium bells began to toll. Once, twice, thrice. Each note pressed the air flat. The rune circle ignited. Voss felt the warp reach for him. He hated that moment every time. The instant between places. The cold intimacy of unreality brushing against his armor. The suggestion of claws beyond the warding light. The pressure of vast attention. The promise that distance was a lie. That flesh was a door. That the soul was meat with a name. Then reality struck him like a hammer. He landed knee-deep in blood. Not metaphor. not mud darkened by slaughter. Blood, hot, clotted and steaming in the open air. His boots sank into it with a wet pull as his armor stabilized. Around him, grey knights appeared in bursts of silver light, weapons raised, formation intact. The sky above Karen Vulkanis was black and red, crowded with burning orbital wreckage falling like judgment. Ash fell in heavy sheets. Every breath would have killed an unarmored man. The air was poison, heat, rot, and warp discharge. Vulkan stood ahead of them at the edge of a vast crater, his back to the grey knights, his hammer held low. He seemed larger on the surface, not by measurement, not by the sterile logic of Auspec's returns, but by truth. Some beings diminished when placed against catastrophe. Vulkan did not. The burning moon looked less like a battlefield around him and more like a forge awaiting its master's hand. Voss lifted his stormbolter and aimed at the Primarch's spine. Every grey knight near him shifted a fraction, not in doubt, in readiness. Vulkan did not turn. "You are cautious," said the Primarch. "You are impossible," Voss replied. Vulkan looked down into the crater. The firelight moved over his face. "No, I am necessary." From the crater came a sound. At first, Voss thought it was tectonic collapse. Then the sound formed layers. Laughter, chanting, grinding metal, wet chewing, bells tolling from mouths without tongues. The crater floor split open in 9 places, each fissure burning with a different color of damnation. Severian raised his halberd. "Contact below." "No," Voss said. "Contact everywhere." Shapes moved through the ash. Men who had once been workers came crawling over the crater rim on broken limbs, dragging tools, chains, and pieces of their own bodies. Some had furnace grates bolted over their faces. Some had cogitator cables threaded through their eyes. Some split apart as they crawled, birthing lesser demons slick with fluids and laughing like murdered children. Behind them came larger things, horned and many-armed, their hides branded with sigils that squirmed away from sight. The grey knights opened fire. Stormbolters hammered. Cybolt rounds crossed the dark in silver streaks, punching into demon flesh and detonating with sanctified force. Warp spawn burst apart in sprays of ichor, bone, and burning shadow. Nemesis blades ignited. The first wave struck the grey knight line and broke upon it, not because it lacked fury, but because fury alone had no meaning before warriors bred, trained, and soul-bound for this single war. Voss fired until his first magazine ran dry. A worker thing reached him, its chest open, its ribs spread like fingers around a chittering demon face. He crushed the face with his boot, drove his sword down through the body, and spoke the banishment phrase without heat. Beside him, Vulkan moved. The Primarch did not charge. He advanced. That was worse. Every blow of his hammer erased something. A demon engine lunged from smoke, all brass limbs and screaming pistons, its maw filled with rotating saws, wet with human pulp. Vulkan caught it by the jaw, stopped its momentum dead, and struck once. The demon engine collapsed inward around the impact, its skull, furnace heart, and bound spirit compacted into a shrieking mass of ruined metal. He hurled the carcass into the oncoming horde, crushing scores beneath it. A tower of skulls toppled nearby, spilling thousands of heads into the blood. Their jaws opened as one. 9, they said. 9, 9, 9. The crater answered. Deep beneath the moon, beneath the manufactorum roots, beneath the slave vaults and magma arteries, beneath the oldest Mechanicus seals, the 9 thrones awakened fully. Voss felt them through his wards, not as enemies on a battlefield, as kings in a court, as predators noticing meat, as gods remembering hatred. Vulkan raised his hammer. Fire crawled across its head and up his arm. The unbound flame answered somewhere below, brightening through miles of stone, calling to him, or warning him, or accusing him. The Primarch's eyes burned hotter. "Grey Knight," Vulkan said. Voss cut down another demon and stepped beside him. "Primarch, the relic is beneath us." So is the council. Vulkan looked into the crater as the first immense shadow moved under the lava light. Then we descend. Voss wanted to deny him, wanted to bind him in protocol, test him with names, scour him with wards, force certainty from the impossible. But the moon was dying. The gate below was opening. The screams of billions had become a liturgy for monsters. He lowered his blade toward the crater. "By Titan," he said, "by the throne, by the Emperor's will, we descend." Far below, in the cathedral grown from bone and iron and screaming souls, 9 demon princes leaned forward upon their thrones. Their voices rose together, one command spoken through 9 mouths, shaking the roots of the dead forge moon. "The Drake has come. Begin the butchery." Beneath Karen Vulkanis, reality had been made obedient to pain. There were no true depths here. Depth was a mortal habit, a rule for stone and gravity, and those who needed distance to have meaning. The place beneath the forge moon was not a cavern, though caverns opened into it. It was not the warp, though the warp breathed through it. It was a wound forced between existence and damnation, held open by sacrifice, hatred, and the patient malice of beings that had once worn mortal flesh and had long since learned to despise the weakness of bone. The cathedral rose from that wound. It had been grown, not built. Its pillars were femurs from giants that had never lived, bound in brass and crusted with old prayers flensed from the skins of priests. Its arches were ribs. Its windows were mirrors, each one reflecting a different hell. In one pane burned an endless battlefield, where warriors hacked at one another beneath a sky of falling axes. In another, bloated gardens swelled with fruit that wept pus and sang lullabies in the voices of dead children. Others showed labyrinths of impossible crystal, corridors folding into eyes, mouths opening in books, and pale palaces where pleasure had been sharpened into knives. Across every wall crawled scripture written in screaming souls, the letters twisting as they were read, each word a hook in the mind. At the cathedral's heart stood the thrones. There were 9 of them, arranged around a chasm filled with fire that did not rise upward, but sank forever. Above the chasm hung the unbound flame, chained in black iron and blasphemous verse, burning with a light too pure for the filth around it. The flame resisted everything. It scorched the demons that came too near. It blistered the living scripture. It made the brass sweat, the bone crack, the mirrors turn away. It was a fragment of forge wrath and ancient loyalty, a relic that had outlived masters, wars, and forgotten oaths. It should have been hidden in sanctified darkness. Instead, it hung in the court of monsters, and its light was being made to serve. Vorlash Akar sat highest among the 9. He had once been a lord commander of the Emperor's armies, if the thing that remained could be believed. Perhaps he had once worn honor. Perhaps he had once spoken of compliance, unity, and the destiny of mankind beneath the Emperor's gaze. Now his armor was a parody of imperial majesty, black and gold and wet with inner shadow, its eagle icon split down the breast and remade as a 2-headed carrion thing feeding upon a crown. His face was handsome in the way statues were handsome, cold, severe, and utterly dead behind the eyes. Horns of cracked obsidian rose from his brow like a war crown. A cloak of flayed command banners hung from his shoulders, each one still bearing the heraldry of regiments he had personally damned. He smiled as the unbound flame pulsed. "Behold," Vorlash said, his voice rich with courtly contempt, "the loyalists come as they always come, late, righteous, and already useful." To his right, Graxhul's skull render leaned forward upon a throne of brass skulls, each one biting the next. His hide was the color of clotted blood. His arms were massive, corded with demonic muscle, and bound in chains that ended in hooks buried through his own flesh. An axe rested across his knees, its edge chewing slowly through the air. "Enough words," Graxhul growled. "Let the moon split. Let the silver ones drown in slaughter. Let the drake come howling. I will nail his hearts to my throne and drink the steam from them. Across from him sat the other Cornate prince, Carvoth Red Testament, taller and leaner, his skull face crowned in iron antlers hung with severed helms. Where Graxhul was, rage made flesh. Carvoth was ritual murder, discipline bent into atrocity. Every breath he took came out as a war oath. Blood owed, Carvoth intoned. Blood counted, blood rendered. The Son of Fire will pay in wounds. The Grey Knights will pay in skulls. Their names will be hammered flat and fed to the brass road. One of the Nurgle princes laughed softly, and the sound was a sack of organs sliding down a stair. Mordath Bile-crowned reclined upon a throne swollen with fungus, bone, and diseased velvet. His belly had split open in a smiling wound, from which pale hands emerged to stroke the arms of his seat. A crown of rusted syringes had been hammered into his scalp. Flies moved around him in patient constellations. "My fierce brothers are always in such haste," Mordath said with affectionate rot thickening every word. "Let them come. Let them breathe. Let them suffer properly. There is tenderness in decay. There is devotion in the fever. The drake has burned for so long. He must be so tired." The second servant of the plague god, Ulvor the kindly ruin, was vast enough that his throne had grown around him like a diseased fortress. His face was almost paternal, swollen and split, the eyes small and wet with obscene warmth. Tiny bells rang inside his chest each time he moved. "I will embrace him," Ulvor murmured. "I will show him that all fires gutter, even Primarchs cool, even gods rot, even duty becomes soft in the end." The Tzinchian princes did not sit so much as a cur. Sarthul of the Changing Veil occupied a crystal throne that altered with every glance. Sometimes he had avian features, sometimes a mask of gold, sometimes no face at all, only a ring of eyes turning inward upon a blue flame. His fingers were too many and too long, and each moved as though writing invisible prophecies in the air. "The drake descends because he must," Sarthul said. "He must because he chooses. He chooses because choice was prepared for him before he remembered choosing. Be grateful, brothers. The path is already behind him." Beside him, Itharak's mirror tongue split his attention between the council and the 1,000 reflections orbiting his throne. Each reflection spoke a heartbeat before he did, or perhaps after, or perhaps in place of him. His body was robed in feathers made of glass, each feather containing the image of a different battlefield. "The silver ones will ask whether he is true," Itharax whispered. "They will doubt the anvil while standing upon it. Delicious. Their suspicion is a locked door. We have brought keys made of necessity." The Slaaneshi princes watched the relic with expressions of rapt hunger. Velisar the Exquisite wore a body too beautiful to be anything but a weapon. His skin was alabaster, stretched over impossible grace, marked by scars so precise they formed hymns. Blades curved from his wrists, not crude weapons, but elegant extensions of desire. His throne was polished ivory and living nerve, strung with harp chords made from spinal tissue. "Such restraint in that flame," Velisar said. "Such denial, such discipline. I long to hear it scream. I long to teach it indulgence." The other, Cadrix of the perfumed lash, was draped in silk that crawled like skin. His face altered between perfect youth and skull-thin malice, always smiling, always listening for weakness. His voice was soft enough that prisoners leaned closer, despite themselves. "The drake's grief will be exquisite," Cadrix said. "Not his pain. Pain is too simple. His grief. The moment he understands that mercy can be made into a blade against him. That will be art." At the base of the thrones stretched the sacrificial trenches. They crossed continents in the real world above, and echoed here as red canyons cut through the cathedral floor. Billions of mortal cultists filled them from horizon to horizon, chained shoulder to shoulder, spine to spine, throat to throat. They were not soldiers. They were not worshippers in any meaningful sense. Some had sworn themselves willingly to the pantheon in hunger, fear, spite, or madness. Others had been dragged from manufactorum dormitories and marked with knives while still repeating their work prayers to the Omnissiah. It no longer mattered. Their names had been emptied from them. Their blood ran through brass channels. Their breath fed the wound. Their deaths were counted by engines made from possessed cogitators that clicked and clacked like insects gnawing bone. When one trench line collapsed from exhaustion, demons with surgeon hands moved through it, stitching the living to the dead so the offering would not be interrupted. Men with their rib cages opened like shrine doors sang praises they did not understand. Boys old enough to carry laser guns and old men whose backs had bent under decades of forge labor were chained alike. Their eyes were pinned open toward the chasm so that the last thing they saw would be the unbound flame turned toward darkness. Vorlash lifted one clawed hand. A choir of prisoners was dragged forward. They had been imperial officers, priests, Skitari overseers, naval armsmen, militia colonels, and administratum tithe clerks. Loyal men, most of them. Weak in flesh, but stubborn in creed. The demons had found amusement in that stubbornness. They had stripped the prisoners without killing them and stretched them upon tall poles of black iron. Their skins had been peeled back and nailed wide so that each man formed a banner of his own body. Their nerves had been drawn from their spines in glistening cords and threaded into vox amplifiers mounted beneath their chins. Their mouths had been fitted with brass speakers. Their lungs had been replaced with bellows worked by imp claws. At Vorlash's gesture, the living banners began to speak, not with words of their choosing. Their ruined bodies blared a hymn of corruption across the cathedral, their voices forced into praise while their eyes wept blood. One tried to bite off his tongue, but the machine in his jaw would not allow it. Another managed to spit a single human word through the demonic cant. Throne. Graxel laughed and hurled a hook at him. The chain punched through the man's chest and tore him from the pole in a wet red burst. The banner body hit the floor still twitching, its nerves trailing sparks from the vox array. Throne, Graxel mocked. Call louder. Perhaps the corpse will climb down and save you. A deeper silence followed, not from fear, from defiance. At the far end of the cathedral, bound inside a circle of inverted wards, knelt a grey knight. His armor had been stripped from him piece by piece, not by mortal tools, but by patient blasphemies. Plates of silver ceramite hung around the circle like trophies, their inscriptions smoking where demon claws had touched them. His body was ruined, but unbowed. Hooks held his arms wide. Nails of black crystal pinned his legs to the floor. His skin was carved with counter-litanies and symbols designed to turn his own sanctity against him. Around his head drifted small demons shaped like cherubs, each with the face of a dead brother, each whispering memories stolen from his mind. His name had been Brother Iosef Dravorn, of the Third Brotherhood of Titan. He remembered it because he chose to. A demon peeled a memory from him. It came free as a ribbon of light drawn through his eye. In it was a training hall beneath Titan's ice, the clash of blades, the voice of a mentor, the smell of incense and weapon oil. The demon ate the memory and squealed as the sanctity burned its throat. Brother Iosef lifted his head. His eyes were swollen. One was gone. The other glared at the thrones. "I am the hammer," he said. The words were broken, but they were his. Kadric smiled. Still performing, still reciting. How charming. Shall we take the next memory? Perhaps the first time he learned fear. Perhaps the first time he killed a brother whose soul had opened like a door. Sarthul extended one finger. No. Leave the spine of him intact. A broken ward cannot witness properly. Vorlash rose from his throne. The cathedral changed when he stood. The screaming scripture quieted. The mirrors dimmed. Even the Cornate princes watched with their weapons still. Vorlash descended the steps between the thrones, each footfall leaving an imperial aquila burned upside down into the floor. He approached the captured Grey Knight and crouched before him with the solemn mockery of a general addressing a valued subordinate. "You have endured well," Vorlash said. "Titan breeds fine locks for the doors of reality. Fine locks, fine chains, fine liars." Brother Iosef spat blood onto the demon prince's face. The blood smoked against Vorlash's cheek. Vorlash smiled wider. There it is, the little ember, the refusal, the beautiful stupidity that makes the sons of the Emperor so useful. "I know your kind," Iosef rasped. "You speak because silence would show what you are. Nothing wearing a crown." Graxhul snarled from his throne. "Let me break him." "No," Vorlash said without looking back. The single word held command, and the Kornate prince's throne shrieked beneath his tightening grip. Vorlash reached out and placed one talon against Iosef's brow. The Grey Knight stiffened as demonic power entered him, searching, prying, peeling at the edges of memory and soul. His muscles tore against the hooks. Blood ran from his nose and ears. His teeth cracked under the pressure of his clenched jaw. Vorlash spoke softly. "Tell me what comes." Iosef shuddered. The inverted wards flared. The demons around him hissed as the Grey Knight's soul burned brighter in resistance. "Silver," Iosef forced out. "Fire. Wrath. More. A hammer. More." The Grey Knight laughed then. It was a terrible sound, ruined and wet and full of victory. "Judgment." Vorlash removed his talon. For the first time, annoyance touched his perfect face. Velisar clapped slowly, the sound like blades kissing. How noble, how empty, how tragic. Mordath sighed with grandfatherly disappointment. "He will break. They always do, poor thing. Some simply take longer to learn the kindness of surrender." Brother Iosef raised his head again. "I am the hammer." Ulvor leaned forward, bells chiming inside his chest. "No, little one, you are the nail." Vorlash returned to the center of the council and lifted both hands toward the unbound flame. The relic answered him with pain. Its light lanced across his armor, burning away patches of shadow, exposing the raw warp flesh beneath. He welcomed it. He needed it pure. He needed it resisting. Corruption alone would not open the gate. Filth alone could tear reality, but it could not make the wound permanent. For that, the ritual needed contradiction. A loyal flame chained in a traitor cathedral. A son of the Emperor drawn by compassion into a mechanism built from cruelty. A savior forced to choose between saving the many and sealing the wound. "The Drake is not here to stop us," Vorlash said. The council listened. "He is here because the relic called him. He is here because the dead cried out. He is here because he cannot turn away from suffering. He is here because Vulkan, son of the Emperor, still believes strength exists to shield the weak." Vorlash laughed then, and the sound carried the memory of imperial parade grounds, victory speeches, and oath ceremonies turned rancid. How exquisitely useful. The Imperium makes weapons and teaches them to love the hands they protect. Then it wonders why those hands make such fine chains. Karvoth slammed the haft of his axe against the floor. "We should meet him in slaughter." "We shall," Vorlash said, "but not yet. First he must see what has been done. First he must hear them. Every worker, every soldier, every child of the Forge Moon we have placed between him and necessity. Let compassion drag him downward. Let mercy slow his hand. Let him spend strength-saving ashes while the gate drinks time." Itharax's reflections whispered together. "Choice is the sweetest prison." Sarthal tilted his changing head. "He will try to save those already dead. He will try to preserve those already hollowed. He will mistake movement for life and breath for innocence." Cadrix closed his eyes in pleasure. "And when the Silver Ones demand fire, when they tell him the survivors are anchors, when mercy and duty claw at one another inside his hearts, his grief will season the wound." The Ninefold Gate. Mordath said fondly, gazing into the chasm. A permanent kindness. No more lonely veil, no more cold separation. The warp and flesh embracing at last. An open road, Graxel snarled. A road of skulls. A theorem made real, said Sarthul. A choir without restraint, said Velisar. A kingdom, Vorlash said, and his voice swallowed theirs. A kingdom made from the Emperor's failure. He looked upward, though there was no sky, toward the burning crust and the armies gathering above. He saw the grey knights descending in disciplined wrath. He saw their warded blades and closed minds. He saw Brother Captain Malachor Voss, all suspicion and iron faith. He saw Vulkan standing upon the wounded moon with fire in his eyes, mighty enough to shatter fortress walls with his hands, ancient enough to have known the Emperor's dream before it became a corpse empire. Vorlash's smile returned. Release the first breath. The cathedral obeyed. The sacrificial trenches split open across continents. Cultists died by the million in a single convulsion, their chains tightening, their spines snapping, their throats opening in unison. Their blood did not fall. It rose. It became vapor. It became cloud. Their last exhalations were drawn screaming from their lungs and hurled upward through the wound between worlds. Demons dissolved into mist and reformed as storm fronts. Plague flies became thunderheads. Brass hornets became hail. Shrieking faces stretched thin across cyclone walls. Rain formed from blood, bile, venom, and powdered bone. Lightning crawled with talons. Wind learned hunger. Above Karan Vulkanus, the atmosphere began to move like a living thing. Not an army, not yet. A planetary weather system made of demons rolled across the dead Forge moon, and wherever its shadow fell, men drowned standing up in the breath of hell. The Argent Edict did not carry armies. It carried judgment. In the mustering vaults below the strike cruiser's spine, the sons of Titan prepared for war in silence, deep enough to shame the void. There were no cheering regiments, no brass bands, no banners borne by sweating mortal hands. There were no millions of guardsmen waiting in troop decks, no armoured columns chained into landers, no preachers screaming themselves hoarse before men sent to die by the acre. Those belonged to the wider Imperium, to its endless meat and metal, to the grinding arithmetic by which mankind purchased another dawn with 1 billion unmarked graves. The grey knights were fewer. They had always been fewer. A blade did not need to be vast. It needed to be sharp. It needed to be clean. It needed to strike where the wound was deepest. Brother Captain Malachor Voss walked the length of the mustering vault, with his helm sealed and his storm bolter locked to his wrist. Ranks of warriors stood before him in warded plate, each one a fortress of sanctified ceramite, gene-wrought flesh, and bound psychic will. Terminators waited in heavy armor, engraved with names of banished horrors. Their armor growled softly as the machine spirits within flexed and woke, power fists closing, nemesis blades humming with blue-white force. Paladins stood apart like silver statues cut from a harder age, each bearing relic weapons that had tasted the death of things no mortal mind could remember without madness. Purifiers knelt in a circle around a burning brazier of cold flame, their heads bowed, their voices low and unified, as they spoke banishment canticles older than most imperial worlds. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Power gathered around them all the same. Every syllable was a nail hammered into the skin of reality. Every name spoken in High Gothic was a chain. Every breath was controlled, measured, weaponized. Beyond the purifiers, the librarian conclave stood within hexagrammic circles cut into the deck and filled with powdered bone, silver dust, and ash from sanctified pyres. Their psychic hoods glowed with contained lightning. Blood ran from the eyes of one of them and vaporized before it reached his gorget. Another whispered true name fragments into a reliquary skull whose jaw clicked in answer. though it had belonged to a brother dead for 3 centuries. Around them, servitors with sealed eyes dragged ammunition caskets and blessed promethium canisters upon grav sleds. None looked up. None were permitted to understand what they served. At the far end of the vault, 2 dreadnoughts waited in their restraint frames. The towering war engines hung motionless in fields of pale force, their limbs folded, their nemesis greatswords locked upright, their heavy cannons loaded and thrumming. Within each adamantium cradle stood a grey knight pilot, sealed in armor, hands locked into control gauntlets, mind already half merged with the engine's machine spirit. They looked like men chained inside the rib cages of mechanical gods. Voss stopped before them. "Brother Garin," he said. The pilot of the first dreadnought opened his eyes. They burned with contained hatred. "I hear, Lord. You will anchor the rightward descent. No glory, no pursuit. Break the largest manifestations and hold the wound edge. By your will. Brother Othric." The second pilot inclined his helm. "I hear. You will guard the librarians until the 3rd canticle is complete. Any mortal who crosses the ward line dies. Any brother who speaks with another voice dies faster. By Titan." Voss turned. His warriors watched him through red lens and silver helm. He felt their readiness as a pressure in the air. They were not eager. Eagerness was for lesser men, for warriors who mistook battle for release. The Grey Knights did not seek release. They endured necessity. "The moon below is compromised beyond measure," Voss said. His voice carried through the vault vox, cold and absolute. "Its industry is dead. Its priesthood is dead. Its militia is dead or worse. We have detected surviving mortal signatures in the outer manufactorum belts and within the deep labor crypts. Some may remain loyal. Some may remain human. None are to be trusted." No one moved. "All witnesses are to be contained. Those exposed to direct demonic manifestation are to be quarantined under ward. Those bearing psychic contamination are to be mind scoured if recoverable. If unrecoverable, execution is mercy. If any resist containment, execution is duty. If any speak with borrowed tongues, burn the body and salt the ash." The words settled like frost. Then the mustering vault doors opened. Heat entered first. It rolled across the deck in a wave, thick with the scent of forge smoke, scorched metal, and something older than flame. The serfs nearest the threshold dropped to their knees and pressed their faces to the iron floor. Some trembled so hard their chains rattled. Vulkan entered the vault. He had come aboard without ceremony and without permission, though the Argent Edict had sealed every passage against him. The ship had accepted him in the manner of machines remembering legends. Bulkheads had opened. Wards had flared and failed to reject him. Servo skulls had turned to watch and then dipped as though bowing. He crossed the chamber with the tread of a walking furnace, his green war plate blackened by orbital fire, his drake hide mantle still smoking. His hammer rested in one hand. Fresh demon ichor burned across its head and dripped to the deck in hissing drops. The Grey Knights did not kneel. Vulkan did not expect them to. He stopped before Voss, towering above even the Terminators, his eyes glowing like coals banked beneath volcanic stone. "I heard your command," Vulkan said. Voss faced him without lowering his gaze. "Then you heard necessity." "I heard the language of execution spoken before judgment. The world below is damned. The world below is wounded. There is no distinction when the warp has entered the wound." Vulkan's expression did not change, but the heat around him deepened. A man is not ash until the flame has judged him. Several purifiers ceased chanting for the briefest instant. It was enough for Voss to feel the change in the air. Surprise. Not doubt, but the recognition of a different creed standing within blade reach. Voss stepped closer to the Primarch. It was a useless gesture in physical terms. Vulkan was larger, older, stronger, and made by the hand of the Emperor for wars that had broken the galaxy. But authority did not always belong to size. Mercy is a door, Voss said. Demons know how to open doors. Vulkan looked at him for a long moment. The mustering vault seemed to hold its breath. At last the Primarch nodded once, slow and grave. Then bar the door. Do not mistake every soul behind it for the enemy. I will not risk mankind for sentiment. Nor will I. You would spare them. I would know them before I burn them. That hesitation may kill worlds. Vulkan's voice lowered, and the words came like iron drawn from a forge. Then I will be swift. It was not agreement. It was not warmth. It was not brotherhood. It was enough. Voss turned from him. The Primarch will descend with first strike elements. He is not under Titan command. A few helms shifted. Voss continued. Nor are we under his. Our purpose aligns until it does not. Vulkan breaks what must be broken. We cut what must be severed. He is the hammer. We are the warded blade. Let neither tool envy the other. Vulkan gave a low rumble that might have been approval or grief. Well spoken, son of Titan. I am not your son. No, Vulkan said. You are my father's weapon. The teleportarium bells began to toll before Voss could answer. The first descent window opened amid catastrophe. Karan Vulkanis had grown a storm. It covered the moon from horizon to horizon, a churning planetary skin of demon vapor and sacrificial breath. From orbit, it resembled weather only in the way a corpse resembled sleep. Cloud banks crawled with faces stretched thin across their surfaces. Lightning forked upward into space, each bolt ending in hooked fingers that clawed at falling debris. Plague meteors burned green as they descended, each one a swollen knot of diseased flesh around a core of possessed iron. Winged demon engines circled through the upper atmosphere in packs, their brass pinions cutting trenches through the clouds, their cannons vomiting skull-shaped shells that screamed until impact. The wreckage of the dead, the fleet continued to fall. Cathedral ships broke apart in slow majesty, their chapels and gun decks descending as burning continents. Corpse barges rained frozen bodies that thawed and burst in the upper heat, creating red mist trails across the sky. Imperial monitors, already gutted, were seized by the storm and turned into spinning blades of wreckage. The moon below answered by firing its own corrupted batteries into the heavens. Into that madness, the grey knights cast themselves. The teleportarium did not translate them in clean lines. The warp around Karan Vulkanis was too wounded, too crowded, too hungry. Reality bent. Coordinates screamed. Auspec's ghosts multiplied and died. The first strike wave vanished in columns of silver light, not as an army, but as a series of surgical wounds cut into impossibility. Voss arrived sideways upon the wall of a manufactorum tower that no longer obeyed gravity. His boots struck metal. Mag locks bit. He was standing on a vertical surface above a drop filled with fire and flying debris, while demons crawled upward toward him on too many limbs. His auto-senses corrected. His mind corrected faster. He fired his storm bolter into the first beast's mouth and blew the back of its skull into the storm. Beside him, 3 paladins flashed into being upside down beneath a suspended railway line, landed in perfect formation, and cut apart a knot of half-manifested things before their bodies had finished deciding upon shape. All across the burning sky, silver light appeared in impossible angles. A squad of Terminators manifested in mid-air within the ribcage of a winged plague beast, blades already moving. They hacked outward through rotten meat and spilled into free fall as the creature came apart around them, then vanished again in a secondary teleport flare before striking the ground. Purifiers appeared upon the back of a brass artillery demon crawling over a ruined cathedral dome. Their blades ignited. Their canticle rose. The engine screamed as sanctified fire poured through every rivet and seam, and when it exploded, the grey knights were gone, translated to the next target by a librarian whose nose and ears bled inside his helm. Vulkan did not teleport like the others. He fell. The Primarch descended through storm and wreckage wreathed in fire, hammer in hand, his armor blazing as demon lightning struck him again and again. A plague meteor hit him squarely and burst apart, showering the sky with diseased gore that burned to ash before touching his plate. A winged demon engine saw him falling and turned with predatory hunger. It was a vast thing, part vulture, part gunship, part butchered angel, its wings made from brass spars and stitched skin, its belly swollen with ammunition soles. From its spine rose a cannon made of fused vertebrae, each segment carved with kill runes. The weapon rotated toward Vulkan and fired a beam of shrieking bone-white force. Vulkan took the blast against his chest. The impact drove him backward through a falling section of cruiser hull. Metal folded around him. Fire swallowed him. The demon engine screamed in triumph and dived after him, talons spread, maw opening to reveal grinding rings of teeth and furnace light. Vulkan came out of the fire with both hands empty. His hammer spun away into the storm, deliberately released. He struck the demon engine with his body. The collision cracked the sky. Brass ribs shattered under his shoulder. The engine's wings buckled. Vulkan drove one fist into its throat and seized the spine cannon at the root. The demon engine thrashed, talons gouging deep scars across his armor, its maw biting at his helm, its guns firing wildly into the storm. Vulkan planted his boots against its back, gripped the cannon with both hands, and tore. The spine cannon came free in a wet metallic scream, dragging cables, vertebrae, demonic nerves, and clots of black fire behind it. The demon engine convulsed. Its wings failed. Together they fell toward the manufacturing fields, locked in a plunge of flame and blood. Vulkan raised the torn cannon like a club. He beat the demon engine with its own spine. The first blow caved in half its skull. The second shattered its jaw and sent teeth the size of men spinning into the storm. The third punched through the furnace casing of its chest and released a torrent of burning souls, each one howling as it fled. Vulkan did not stop until the engine no longer had a shape worthy of hatred. He rode the carcass down through a roof of black iron, vanished into the manufactorum beneath, and emerged moments later through a wall in an eruption of molten brick and pulverized demon metal. His hammer returned to his hand, called by some mechanism of will or craft older than the Imperium's decay. Voss saw it from the tower wall. For a moment, even he felt the pull of awe. Then a demon tried to open his armor through the gorget, and he crushed the feeling along with the creature's skull. Voss to all strike elements, he voxed. No fixation, no reverence. Maintain pattern, mark and sever manifestations. The Primarch is not the objective. The relic is not yet recovered. The council remains intact. Acknowledgement runes flickered across his display. Brother Garen's Dread Knight translated into existence in the ruins below, 1 foot crushing a mass of cultists and lesser demons into red paste. The war engine's greatsword swept in a shining arc, decapitating a horned brute large enough to carry a tank beneath one arm. Its heavy psy-cannon roared, each round tearing holes through warp flesh and detonating in flashes of blessed force. Brother Othric landed near the librarians, his Dread Knight's fists closing around a plague thing made from stitched militia corpses. He ripped it in half, then burned both halves until the twitching stopped. The descent became a pattern of controlled violence in a world that had forgotten control. Grey Knights appeared, killed, and vanished. They struck summoning nodes, slaughtered nascent heralds, cut down possessed overseers, and placed ward beacons into the bones of the moon. Mortal survivors were found huddled in furnace gutters and beneath collapsed transit shrines. Some wept and reached for salvation. Some spoke in voices not their own. Voss marked them all. Those whose eyes had turned black were executed before they finished begging. Those who still bled red and prayed in terror were bound, tagged, and dragged behind ward lines by servo skulls and armed thralls. None were comforted, none were trusted, some were saved. Vulkan saw the executions. He said nothing at first. Then he came upon Voss, in the shadow of a toppled prayer tower, where skulls rolled around their boots, and ash fell thick enough to make day into dusk. The Primarch's armor was scored, dented, and steaming. One cheek had been cut open, and the wound glowed faintly before closing. "You kill quickly," Vulkan said. "I kill cleanly." "Not all you have slain were gone." Voss reloaded his stormbolter. "Gone enough." Vulkan's eyes hardened. "That is a small phrase for a large sin, and mercy is a large word for a small infection." The Primarch's hand tightened around his hammer. Nearby, purifiers turned their helms a fraction, but did not intervene. The air between Vulkan and Voss shimmered with heat and ward light. Before either could speak again, the ground split open. Blood erupted from the fissure in a geyser so vast it drowned the ruins of a hab block in a heartbeat. It poured upward first, defying gravity, then fell back as boiling rain. The skulls around the prayer tower began to chant. The storm above pulled away in a spiraling eye, revealing a column of red light rising from below the crust. Something climbed through it. A hand the size of a battle tank gripped the edge of the fissure. Brass claws carved through rockcrete. A second hand followed, dragging a body of muscle, iron and rage from the lake beneath the world. Horns rose first, then a skull face wet with boiling blood, then shoulders chained in trophies, and armor plates hammered from the shields of murdered champions. Wings unfolded behind it, torn and vast, each membrane branded with oaths to the blood god. Its axe came last, pulled from the lake with a sound like a continent being butchered. Graxhul's skull render stood amid the boiling flood, and every Daemon within sight howled his name until the ruins shook, his burning eyes fixed upon Vulkan. "Drake!" the demon prince roared, voice crashing across the battlefield like artillery. "Son of ash, fatherless beast, come bleed for me." Vulkan stepped forward through the blood rain. Voss raised his blade, but the Primarch was already moving. Graxhul lifted his axe and laughed, and the lake of boiling blood rose behind him like a red mountain eager to fall. The Imperial Tank Division died before it. Understood that it had been sent to delay a god. It had been the last armoured reserve on the Western Manufacturum front, a formation of ash-scarred Lehman Russ squadrons, siege crawlers, hellhounds, recovery engines, ammunition haulers, and 3 super-heavy engines bearing names from a dozen forgotten campaigns. Their crews had been men of iron habit and exhausted faith. They had fought through the first night of the moon's damnation, sealing their hatches against screaming vapors, grinding through worker mobs and demon-warped servitors, firing until their barrels sagged and their ammunition rights became prayers muttered through cracked lips. They had seen infantry regiments vanish under tides of teeth. They had seen priests burst open and spill flies from their mouths. They had seen the sky bleed. Still they advanced when ordered. That was mankind's oldest miracle. The order had been simple. Hold the basalt flats before Furnace Line Septimus. Deny the enemy passage. Await reinforcement from Silver assets and unknown loyalist heavy contact. Do not withdraw. So they had formed a wall of armor across the Black Plain. Their engines growled beneath the blood rain. Their vox channels hissed with catechisms, fire orders, curses, and the wet breathing of crews who knew the ammunition was almost gone. Target augers failed one by one as the warp storm rolled over them. Auspec's returns showed impossible mass, then nothing, then the faces of dead relatives pressed against the glass of display screens. Commissarial command tanks transmitted loyalty oaths on repeat, though most of their commanders were already dead or chewing through their own tongues to keep from speaking the words whispered into their skulls. Then Graxhul's skull render came. He strode from the lake of boiling blood with the ease of a butcher entering his own yard. Every step sank through liquid gore and struck the basalt beneath hard enough to split it. His wings dragged red vapor behind him. His axe burned with the trapped howls of souls chained along the haft. each ghost stretched into a link, each link biting the next. Brass plates were riveted into his hide, skulls swung from his horns. Some were Astartes' helms, some were tank crewmen still wearing their vox beads and prayer tags. All of them screamed when he raised the weapon. The first Baneblade fired at point-blank range. The shell struck Graxhill in the chest and detonated in a sunburst of armor-piercing fury. The blast flattened nearby cultist bodies and hurled blood into the sky in a steaming curtain. When the glare faded, the demon prince was still walking. A crater smoked in his torso. Beneath it burned a furnace of red hate. He laughed, and the sound made ammunition cook off in 3 nearby Russes. The super heavy fired again. Graxhill swung his axe. The blade did not merely cut the Baneblade. It passed through adamantium, crew, fuel, shells, engine spirit, and name. The tank separated from prow to stern in a perfect red line. For a heartbeat, both halves continued forward, tracks grinding, guns searching, men inside still alive enough to understand the shape of their deaths. Then the ammunition stores ignited, and the machine became a flower of fire and meat. Crewmen burst through ruptured hatches as burning fragments. One crawled across the basalt with no legs, dragging intestines behind him like devotional cords, still trying to reach the heavy bolter mounted on the wreck. Graxhill stepped on him without looking down. The tank division opened fire as one. Battle cannons thundered. Vanquisher rounds shrieked. Heavy bolters hammered the rain. Multi-melters spat white fury. Hellhound tanks poured promethium across the blood lake, turning its surface into a burning skin. For a moment, the entire plane vanished behind smoke, muzzle flash, and red steam. It was the sound of the Imperium speaking in the only language that remained to it. Graxhill answered in slaughter. He leapt into the formation, wings beating once, and landed atop a shadow sword with enough force to drive its suspension through the rock. His axe came down and split the volcano cannon housing. Then he reached into the breach with his free hand and dragged the gunner out by the spine. The man came apart in sections. Graxhill hurled the twitching remains into the view slit of another tank, blinding it long enough for his axe to cleave through its turret ring. He kicked a Russ onto its side, punched through the underside, and tore out the crew in a knot of arms, armor glass, torn flak coats, and spraying blood. He bit down on them and spat the remains at the next vehicle, hard enough to crack its hull. A commissar climbed from a burning command tank, coat aflame, power sword raised in one trembling hand. "For the Emperor!" the man shouted. Graxhill bent close, grinning. "For the blood god," he replied, and bit the commissar's head from his shoulders. The division died in minutes. It died loudly. It died faithfully. It died buying less than 100 breaths. Across the plain, Vulkan came through the ruin alone. Blood rain struck his armor and became steam. It hissed from his pauldrons, ran black across the drake scales of his mantle, and vanished in vapor around the glow of his warplate. Each footfall cracked the basalt, not shattered, cracked, as though the moon itself flinched under the memory of what had made him. Firelight moved in the wounds across his armor. His hammer hung low in one hand. His other hand opened and closed slowly, the fingers flexing, as if remembering the shape of the enemy's throat before they had reached it. The Grey Knights did not follow him into the center of the plain. They knew the geometry of the moment. A duel between beings of such magnitude was not a gap into which lesser warriors forced themselves. It was a storm front. It was a reactor breach. It was an altar where pride became annihilation. Instead, Brother Captain Voss ordered the Brotherhoods to form kill circles around the battlefield's edge. Silver-armored warriors moved with disciplined precision through the wreckage of the murdered tank division. Terminators anchored the outer ring, storm bolters firing in controlled bursts. Purifiers took the inner arcs, nemesis blades raised, voices joined in banishment canticles that cut through the demon storm like blades through wet cloth. Paladins stood where the demonic pressure was strongest, their halberds and swords glowing with psychic force, each warrior a warded tower against the tide. Lesser demons came crawling from the blood lake by the thousands. They came laughing, howling, vomiting teeth, dragging chain hooks through the organs of the fallen. They came wearing the faces of tank crewmen and militia officers, still speaking in stolen voices. They came with brass claws and torn wings, with dog skull heads and butcher blades fused into their arms. They came not to win, but to interfere, to distract, to die usefully. The Grey Knights butchered them in silence and scripture. Voss drove his sword through the mouth of a horned beast and spoke a true name fragment that made the creature implode, its bones collapsing inward around a flash of silver fire. Brother Severian stood within a ring of ash, both hands upon his force staff, eyes bleeding behind his helm as he bound the edges of the duel with hexagrammic lines of psychic will. Brother Garen's Dread Knight held the eastern flank, crushing demon bodies underfoot and firing his heavy psy-cannon into the thickest swarms until the recoil shook his war engine like thunder made mechanical. The kill circles held. At the center, Graxhul saw Vulkan and forgot the tanks. The demon prince lifted his axe and pointed it with obscene ceremony. Blood ran from the blade upward, crawling along the edge in defiance of gravity. "Drake," Graxhul roared, "you walk like a warlord and stink like a mourner. I have eaten braver things from the gutters of dead worlds." Vulkan continued forward. Graxhul spread his wings. The blood lake behind him surged, rising in a red wall filled with faces and hands. "Look at them," the demon said, gesturing to the wrecked armor, the torn crews, the men burning in their steel coffins. "They died calling for you. They died believing the Imperium remembers names. It remembers nothing. It spends them. It wastes them. It feeds them to monsters and calls the feeding duty." Vulkan stopped a dozen paces away. The distance between them shuddered. "You speak as though cruelty grants wisdom," Vulkan said. Graxhul bared his teeth. "Cruelty is truth. Your father knew it. His empire knows it. Your silver curs know it. Only you still clutch at tenderness, like a child hiding a candle from the storm." Vulkan's eyes narrowed. "Compassion," Graxhul said, voice thick with contempt, "is a chain around a god's throat." The blood rain intensified. It hammered against Vulkan's armor. Steam rolled around him in white sheets. When he spoke, his voice was not raised. It did not need to be. "No, compassion is why monsters fear me." Graxhul attacked. The axe descended with the force of a falling fortress. Vulkan met it with his hammer. The impact flattened every loose corpse within 50 paces. Tank wrecks shifted on the basalt. The nearest Grey Knights braced as the shockwaves struck their ward lines and scattered blood into red mist. The sound was not metal against metal. It was mountain against mountain, oath against hatred, creation against desecration. Graxhul struck again and again, each blow fast enough to tear fire from the air. Vulkan gave ground only once, boots carving trenches through basalt, then drove forward and smashed his hammer into the demon prince's ribs. Armor plates buckled, brass split. Something inside Graxhul burst, with a sound like an abattoir wall collapsing. The demon laughed through broken fangs and slammed his horned skull into Vulkan's face, hard enough to crack the Primarch's helm plating. Vulkan answered with his fist. The punch hit Graxhul's jaw and turned the demon's head halfway around. Teeth flew like shrapnel. A lesser creature struck by such a blow would have become paste. Graxhul rolled with it, wings spreading, axe coming around low. The blade carved through Vulkan's thigh armor and bit into flesh beneath. Blackened blood spilled onto the ash, smoking where it landed. Graxhul inhaled the scent and trembled with delight. "There," he snarled, "you bleed." Vulkan's hammer came down. Graxhul barely raised his axe in time. The blow drove him to one knee and cracked the basalt beneath him into a spiderweb of red fissures. Molten stone welled up through the cracks. Vulkan stepped in, shoulder first, and drove the demon prince backward. Graxel's wings beat, hurling blood rain in sheets. Vulkan struck him again. The hammer hit the demon's shoulder and ripped one brass plate free, along with a slab of muscle and a torrent of boiling ichor. The demon prince roared a murder oath that made the clouds twist into skull shapes. Then he opened his left hand and unleashed demon fire. It burst across Vulkan in a red-black torrent, not flame alone, but hatred given heat. It carried the memory of every skull taken in Graxel's name, every battlefield where dying men had drowned in their own blood, every butchered prayer offered to the brass throne. It washed over Vulkan's armor and crawled through the cracks, searching for flesh, for pain, for fear. Drake-forged plate glowed, runes blackened. The mantle on Vulkan's shoulders caught fire and burned with a stink of ancient scale. The grey knights chanted louder. Voss saw the demon fire lick toward the ward circle and cut down 3 manifestations, trying to ride its edge into real space. He heard Severian speaking true name fragments through clenched teeth. Not the full name, never the full name until the moment of binding. Fragments only, hooks, barbs, pieces of the chain. Graxhul, Severian intoned. Gar Axhul, skull render, axe bound, blood sworn, throne chained. The words made the demon prince flinch. Vulkan walked through the fire. His armor burned, his skin burned, his eyes did not. He emerged from the torrent and slammed his hammer into Graxel's chest with both hands behind the blow. The impact lifted the demon prince from the ground and hurled him through the remains of a super-heavy tank. The wreck exploded around him. Vulkan followed through the blast, a shape of green and gold wreathed in fire. Graxhul rose from the wreckage with one arm hanging broken and laughed blood down his chin. "Good," he growled. "Good. Show me the weapon your father made." Vulkan did not answer. They met again amid the tank graveyard. Axe and hammer collided. The shockwaves flattened hab blocks along the edge of the plain, structures already gutted by bombardment collapsing into avalanches of dust, bodies, and burning metal. A manufactorum chimney broke at its base and fell like a spear, impaling the blood lake, sending up a geyser of gore and steam. The moon shook beneath them. Every blow seemed too large for the world that held it. Graxhul feinted high, then drove the hooked back edge of his axe into Vulkan's chest. The blade punched through the Primarch's breastplate. For an instant, everything became still. The axe had opened him from collar to sternum, splitting Drake-forged plate and the flesh beneath. Blackened blood spilled in a heavy rush, hot enough to hiss when it struck the ash. Vulkan's knees bent, his hammer dipped. The demon prince leaned close, eyes blazing with triumph. "There," Graxel whispered. "The god kneels." Vulkan's left hand rose. It closed around one of Graxel's horns. The demon's triumph vanished. Vulkan's other hand seized the second horn. His wounded chest poured blood down his armor. His breath came once, deep and terrible. The wound should have ended the duel. It should have staggered him, slowed him, made him mortal in the only way that mattered. Instead, the pain seemed to pass through him and find no throne. "No," Vulkan said. He drove his forehead into Graxel's face. Bone cracked, brass split. The demon prince reeled. Vulkan held the horns and dragged him downward, step by step, through boiling blood and broken basalt, toward the nearest fissure where molten stone had risen from the moon's wounded mantle. Graxel hacked at him with the axe haft. The chained souls along the weapons screamed. Vulkan ignored them. Graxel clawed at his arms, ripping gouges through armor. Vulkan ignored that too. The Primarch reached the lava fissure and forced Graxel's head down into the molten stone. The demon prince screamed. The sound turned blood rain to vapor across the plain. Vulkan held him there. Graxel thrashed, wings hammering the ground, claws carving trenches through the basalt. One wing swept toward Vulkan with enough force to decapitate a battle tank. Vulkan lifted his foot and brought it down upon the joint. The wing bone shattered. Membrane tore. Brass pins burst from demonic flesh. He crushed the broken limb beneath his boot and drove Graxel deeper into the molten stone. Now, Voss voxed. The Grey Knights tightened the kill circles. Every brother who knew the fragments spoke them. Terminators, purifiers, paladins, librarians, even dreadnought pilots within their towering engines joined the rite. Their voices did not blend into song. They became machinery, a weapon made of names. Gar Axe Hurl, Skull Render, Blood Oathbreaker, Brass Hound, Chain Eater, Throne Leech, Gar Axe Hurl. The demon prince bucked against Vulkan's grip. The lava boiled around his submerged skull. Shapes tried to climb from his shadow. Smaller demons birthed from his rage, but the Grey Knights cut them apart before they fully formed. Severian stepped closer, Force staff raised, his armor smoking from the pressure of the true name rite. Gar Axe Hurl, he said, voice breaking. By the authority of Titan, by the ward of the Emperor, by the blade and the flame, be severed. Graxel tore his ruined face from the lava. Half his skull was gone. One eye ran molten down his cheek. His jaw hung in brass strings and charred flesh. Still he laughed. Still he tried to swing the axe. Vulkan released one horn, caught the descending weapon by the haft, and held it. For a heartbeat, Primarch and Demon Prince strained against one another, their strength cracking the ground beneath them. Then Vulkan wrenched the axe aside and drove his hammer into Graxel's chest. The blow did not send the demon flying. It pinned him. Vulkan struck again, and again. Each hammerfall drove the true name deeper into the wound the Grey Knights had opened. Each impact shattered a piece of Graxel's presence in real space. Brass plates burst, ribs exploded outward, blood sprayed upward in scalding sheets. The demon prince's body began to come apart, not dying as mortals died, but losing purchase, losing shape, being rejected by the world he had entered to defile. Voss stepped into the inner circle and drove his nemesis blade through Graxul's broken wing, pinning the last anchor of the manifestation. "Finish it," he said. Vulkan raised his hammer one final time. Graxul's skull render looked up at him through a ruined face and spat a curse in the language of the blood god. Vulkan brought the hammer down. The demon prince burst apart in a detonation of blood, brass, shadow, and burning skulls. The shockwave hurled Grey Knights backward against their own ward circles. Tank wrecks flipped. The blood lake collapsed inward, sucked through the fissures beneath the plain. Graxul's scream rose into the storm and was cut short as the banishment took him, dragging, his broken essence howling back into the howling dark beyond matter. For several breaths, there was silence. Vulkan stood amid the ruin, chest open, armor split, hammer dripping molten gore. Steam rose from him. His wound burned as it closed slowly, stubbornly, flesh knitting beneath shattered plate. He did not look victorious. He looked wounded in ways deeper than flesh. Voss approached, blade still raised. "The first is banished," he said. Vulkan looked toward the ground. Beneath them, something answered the banishment. A line of red light spread across the basalt, running through the cracks made by the duel. It widened. It deepened. It formed a burning sigil so vast that the tank graveyard became only a mark within its outer ring. Far below, under the crust, a lock opened with the sound of 1,000,000,000 chains snapping at once. Severian staggered and fell to one knee. "The seal," he rasped. His banishment fed the seal. Voss turned toward the crater as the moon groaned. Vulkan's eyes burned with terrible understanding. From beneath Karen Vulkanis, the first seal of the Ninefold gate opened. Manufactorum District Primus had once been the pride of Karen Vulkanis. It was a continent of iron roofs and furnace stacks, a city larger than lesser nations, fed by rail arteries and conveyor veins that had never known stillness. In better centuries, its machine halls had hammered out armor plate for war engines, reactor casings for void ships, ammunition for crusades whose soldiers would never learn the name of the moon that armed them. Its workers had lived and died beneath its chimneys in obedient millions, birthed in labour vaults, branded in ration chapels, chained to guild lines before their bones had finished growing. They had known no sky except smoke. They had known no dawn except furnace glow. They had known no prayer except production. Now the district had learned a new industry: slaughter. Brother Justicar Arian Thane entered through Gatehouse Primus, behind Brother Captain Voss, and to the left of Vulkan, Primarch of the 18th Legion, and for the first time in 2 centuries of war against the demonic, he felt the old, cold pressure of awe try to enter him. The gatehouse was large enough to admit titans. Its arch had been made from adamantium ribs and carved with Mechanicus scripture praising the purity of labour. The scripture had been cut away and packed with human teeth. The cog skull reliefs above the entry had been given wet eyes. Each one tracked the grey knights as they advanced. From the walls hung overseers, foremen, forge priests, and militia commanders, some dead, some wishing they were. Their arms had been removed and replaced with lengths of chain. Their open chests were filled with censers that burned fat instead of incense. As the wind moved through them, their hollowed bodies gave off a pipe organ moan. Thane stepped over a worker fused into the floor. The man's torso had been welded into the decking from the waist down. His hands were locked around a spanner. His head turned slowly as Thane passed, vertebrae cracking one at a time. The eyes were human. The mouth was not. It opened too wide and whispered a plague hymn through 3 tongues. Thane put a cybolt round through the skull and kept moving. "Mercy recorded," said Brother Malrek beside him. "Contamination ended," Thane replied. They moved in kill formation, purifiers leading the inner corridor, terminators anchoring the flanks, paladins guarding the librarian triad. The Grey Knights were few, no more than a silver wound cut through a kingdom of rot, but they moved as though the impossible had failed to impress them. Storm bolters tracked every twitch in the machinery. Nemesis blades burned with contained force. Their armor runes glowed through curtains of greasy vapor. Vulkan walked at the center of the advance, and the manufactorum hated him. The hatred was not metaphor. The building itself reacted to him. Conveyor belts shuddered and reversed. Furnace mouths belched sparks as if coughing curses. Crane arms swung toward him with murderous intent, only to melt before touching his armor. The Primarch's wounded breastplate had been partially sealed by his own craft, plates hammered back into place with blows of his fist, and bound in strips of drake hide that smoked but did not burn. Blackened blood still marked him. It steamed where the air kissed it. His hammer rested across one shoulder. In the other hand, he carried a flame taken from nothing visible, a steady glow that made demonic mold recoil from the walls. Thane had fought beside chapter masters. He had seen Grand Masters kill things that entire regiments could not slow. He had watched Dread Knights wrestle greater demons into banishment circles while the world broke around them. Vulkan was different. Not cleaner, not holier, not safer, larger in the soul. The Primarch's silence had weight. His wrath did not lash outward like a mortal temper. It sank into the iron around him, and made the whole district seem suddenly aware that judgment had entered its halls. They found the first production line after 700 paces of burning corridors. It stretched beyond sight, a processional avenue of hooks, clamps, grinders, flesh presses, bone mills, and stamping pistons. Workers had been fused into it in their thousands. Men hung from harnesses by the spine, their legs removed, their arms extended into machinery that forced them to continue laboring. Some still hammered rivets with hands whose fingers had worn down to exposed bone. Others fed strips of their own skin into rollers that flattened it into parchment for demonic scripture. Servitors stood beside them, skull casings split open, cables threaded through brain matter and into vats of greenish pus. Every few breaths the line lurched forward, and another living worker was pulled into a press that folded him into a sheet of meat and metal. The sheet emerged on the other side, stamped with a fly rune. The purifiers began to chant. Their voices were low, controlled, and merciless. The litany of cleansing moved through the air like a blade drawn across a throat. The first demon hiding inside the machinery ruptured before Thane saw it, exploding from a gearbox in a spray of rust, black bile, and screaming eyes. Another burst from the stomach of a fused worker, its many limbs unfolding as it tried to crawl free. Brother Malrek cut it in half with his falchions, both blades trailing white fire. A third manifested as a face in the steam, laughing with rotten gums. Thane spoke the counterphrase and fired into the vapor. The face collapsed inward, shrieking as the cybolt detonated in its borrowed essence. "Burn the line," Voss ordered. Purifier flame answered. It was not promethium. Promethium burned flesh and fuel. The purifiers carried soulfire, sanctified by will, genecraft, and the Emperor's hidden wrath. It rolled down the production avenue in pale waves, passing over loyal human suffering and demon corruption alike, making the possessed parts of the machinery scream louder than the dying men. Demons boiled out of wheels, hooks, skulls, and furnace grates. They burst from within the fused workers, revealing where souls had already been eaten and bodies repurposed as nests. The grey knights cut them down in methodical silence. Vulkan did not stand idle. He moved to the line and tore open the nearest harness. The worker inside fell forward, a ruined man with a shaved skull, blistered lungs, and no legs below the thigh. He looked up at the Primarch with eyes that had never expected to see anything but iron. "My lord," the worker breathed, though perhaps he did not know what he saw. Vulkan lowered him with surprising care. Then he placed one hand upon the man's head. The worker died before the pain could return. Vulkan moved to the next, and the next. He freed those whose souls still clung to their flesh. He killed those already hollowed. He did both with the same grave certainty. His compassion did not make him gentle in the way weak men understood gentleness. It made him precise. It made him present. It made every death a thing witnessed, rather than another number fed into the furnace of imperial necessity. Thane watched him rip a demon from inside a servitor's opened skull and crush it in one fist, then turn and close the dead machine thrall's eyelids with one massive thumb. "He is not a man," Thane said. Voss stood beside him, blade wet with ichor, helm lenses fixed on Vulkan. "No," the brother captain said. "He is what men pray for when men have no artillery left." The answer should have been blasphemous. It was not. It was tactical truth, given the shape of reverence. They pressed deeper. The corpse starch vats had become oceans. District Primus had once processed the dead into nutrition paste for the living, an efficiency praised by administratum clerks and mechanicus overseers alike. Now the vats had overflowed their containment basins and drowned entire sublevels. The fluid was thick, grey-green, and alive with movement. Human remains churned within it, not dissolving, but recombining. Arms surfaced in clusters like weed. Faces rose in bubbles, mouthed thanks, and sank. Eyes floated by the thousands, all turning toward the grey knights. Industrial runoff poured from broken pipes in waterfalls of acid and chemical waste. Where it struck the corpse-starch sea, new things were born. They came crawling up the vat walls, slick and unfinished. Men without skin, dogs with human teeth, infants with the heads of old priests. Limbless torsos that dragged themselves by tongues grown into ropes. Plague demons wearing the stretched faces of forge workers like masks. They laughed and gagged and whispered offers of rest. The purifiers burned them. The corridor became a furnace of white flame, black smoke, and bursting meat. Thane's boots crushed fingers that grew from the floor. A thing shaped like a foreman crawled toward him, its belly swollen with maggots, its mouth repeating production quotas in a warm, paternal voice. He severed its head. The head kept speaking until Malrek stamped it flat. Above the corpse, sea rose a furnace chapel. It hung from chains over the vats, a suspended shrine of blackened iron and cracked stained glass. Its altar had been overturned, its aquila defaced, its pews filled with bodies still moving in prayer. Loyal survivors had barricaded themselves within using benches, tool racks, dead servitors, and their own fear. Thane's auto-senses counted heat signatures, dozens, perhaps more in the Undercroft, mortal, weak, starving, unreliable. Corrupted overseers stood outside the chapel doors. They had been men once, marked by better food, better quarters, and the authority to send other men into grinders for slowing production. Now they wore rusted exoskeletons grown into their spines. Their faces were hidden behind brass masks, shaped like smiling saints. Their bellies were open and filled with buzzing flies. Each carried a shock maul and a ledger bound in human hide. One of them saw Vulkan and bowed. "Great Lord," the overseer crooned, "we kept them for you. We preserved the faithful. We obeyed the new dispensation. We can serve any master. We know how to make men work until they split." Vulkan moved before Voss could issue an order. The first overseer died when the Primarch's hand closed around his head and crushed mask, skull, and thoughts into a wet ball of metal and pulp. The second tried to run. Vulkan's hammer took him between the shoulders and burst him across the chapel steps in a fan of organs, flies, and broken machinery. The third raised his ledger as if it were a shield. Vulkan tore him in half from collar to groin and hurled the pieces into the corpse-starch sea. The vats boiled where the remains struck. No hesitation, no speech, no sermon. Thane understood then that Vulkan's mercy was not softness. It was a blade with one edge turned toward the innocent and the other toward the guilty. The chapel doors opened from within. Survivors stared out from the dark. Workers, militia remnants, machine tenders, boys with shaved heads and tool brands, old men whose lungs rattled with furnace dust. They looked upon the grey knights and recoiled. They looked upon Vulkan and began to weep. "Out," Voss ordered. "Hands visible, eyes lowered, no speech unless commanded." Some obeyed. Some could barely stand. Vulkan stepped toward them, and the survivors surged forward despite the grey knight's weapons. They fell at his feet, clutching at the blood-slick stone, reaching not to touch him, but to be near the heat of something that had come for them. Vulkan did not smile. He raised his hand, and they stilled. "You are not safe," he told them, "but you are seen." A sound like affectionate thunder rolled through the vats. The corpse-starch ocean rose. At its center, a garden surfaced. It was obscene in its patience. Flowers made from lungs opened on stems of bone. Trees of swollen flesh lifted branches heavy with fruit shaped like hearts. Mushrooms erupted from floating corpses, their caps patterned with smiling faces. At the garden's heart reclined Mordath bile-crowned, demon prince of the plague god, vast and soft and magnificent in decay. His throne was a mound of bodies that sighed beneath him. His split belly smiled. His crown of rusted syringes dripped black nectar into his eyes. "Vulkan," Mordath said, and his voice was almost kind. "Poor tired flame, poor eternal sun, how many times have you broken? How many deaths have taught you nothing?" The grey knights raised weapons. Voss held a fist closed, halting the volley. Vulkan turned from the survivors. Mordath spread his arms, and flies poured from his sleeves in glittering clouds. "I can give you rest, not death. Death rejects you, does it not? Cruel little miracle, endless return, endless pain, endless duty. Come to grandfather's garden. Rot does not hurt after the fever passes. Wounds become mouths. Grief becomes soil. You could live forever without agony." Vulkan's face hardened into something colder than rage. "You offer stagnation and call it peace. I offer release. You offer surrender." Mordath chuckled. The corpse sea rippled with the sound. "I offer truth. Even forge fire consumes what feeds it. Even you will tire of burning. Vulkan walked onto the surface of the vat. The corpse starch hardened beneath his feet, boiling black around each step. Mordath's smile widened. Plague things rose from the garden to meet him. Vulkan killed them without slowing. Hammer blows burst them into steam and filth. His free hand closed around a tree of flesh and tore it up by the roots, exposing a knot of screaming human heads beneath. He crushed them in one motion and kept advancing. The purifiers began a higher chant. The garden recoiled. Mordath stood, immense and dripping, his belly wound laughing with a second voice. He vomited a river of bile across Vulkan. It struck the Primarch in a flood, eating at his armor, filling the air with the stink of spoiled worlds. Vulkan vanished beneath it for a heartbeat. Then fire burned through, not around him, from within him. Vulkan emerged wreathed in forge flame, every crack in his armor blazing. He drove his hammer into Mordath's knee, shattering the joint and dropping the demon prince to one side. Mordath reached for him with arms like diseased tree trunks. Vulkan stepped inside the embrace and pressed one burning hand against the demon's split belly. "No," Vulkan said, "you will not have my pain. It is mine. I have earned it." The flame entered Mordath. The demon prince screamed as the garden ignited from the roots upward. Fire ran through the corpse-starch sea in veins of gold and white, burning not the dead matter alone, but the warp corruption threaded through it. Flowers of lung shriveled, bone trees cracked, plague fruit burst and sprayed pus that became ash before it landed. Mordath's swollen body lit from within, his skin glowing like parchment around a furnace. Faces pushed outward from his flesh, screaming. The grey knights chanted louder, binding the wound, sharpening the banishment. Mordath tried to laugh. Fire poured from his mouth. Vulkan drove both hands into the demon's chest and pulled the burning rot apart. Mordath, bile-crowned, collapsed inward, his garden body consuming itself in a pillar of sanctified flame and black smoke. His final cry was not rage, but wounded affection, as though Vulkan had disappointed him by refusing a gift. When the fire faded, the corpse-starch sea had become a crust of ash and glass. Vulkan returned to the chapel steps. The survivors stared at him with terror, adoration, and shock hollowing their faces. Some tried to speak thanks. Voss raised his blade. "Silence," the brother captain commanded. Too late. One survivor, a furnace tender with half his face burned away, opened his mouth. 9 voices emerged. "The Drake saves the kindling." Another, a militia gunner shaking so hard his armor plates rattled, spoke with the same 9-fold resonance. "The silver blade cuts late." A boy worker began to weep blood. When he spoke, the voices shook dust from the chapel walls. "The second seal drinks." All of the survivors opened their mouths together. Their eyes remained human. Their voices did not. "We are inside the innocent," they said. "Choose, Vulkan. Choose, sons of Titan. Save them and open us. Burn them and become us." Voss turned his stormbolter toward the crowd. Vulkan did not move, but the flame around his hand guttered as though the moon itself had drawn breath. The storm held its breath around the furnace chapel. For a moment, the only sound in Manufactorum District Primus was the soft crackle of cooling glass, where the corpse-starch sea had burned clean. Ash drifted through the air in slow grey veils. The chapel chains groaned above the dead vat basin. Far below, beneath the crust of Karan Vulkanis, something vast and patient turned in its sleep and smiled with 9 mouths. The survivors stood between Vulkan and the Grey Knights. They were workers, militia remnants, bonded machine tenders, furnace sweepers, ammunition lifters, and half-starved boys whose shoulders bore tool brands instead of devotional tattoos. Their clothing was scorched. Their skin was blistered from forge heat and plague vapor. Some held broken icons of the machine god. Some clutched imperial prayer tags so tightly the metal had cut into their palms. They were mortal, terrified, and ruined by endurance. They had not marched in banners beneath 8-pointed stars. They had not offered their souls willingly to the warp. They had hidden in a furnace chapel and waited to die with the Emperor's name somewhere inside their fear. Now every one of them spoke with stolen voices. Voss did not hesitate. Purge them! Storm bolters rose in a single movement. The sound was small. Armor servos, fingers tightening on triggers, blades angling downward. It was the sound of mercy ending. Vulkan stepped between the weapons and the survivors. The Primarch did not raise his hammer. He did not need to. His body alone was enough to halt a volley from warriors who had faced greater demons without flinching. The Grey Knights held fire, not out of fear, not out of obedience to him, but because their brother captain had not yet repeated the command. Voss's helm lenses fixed upon Vulkan's face. "Stand aside." "No." The word landed harder than a blow. Behind Vulkan, the survivors began sobbing. One man fell to his knees and pressed his burned forehead against the chapel floor. Another whispered the first line of a forge prayer over and over until his mouth filled with blood. A boy no older than a manufacturer apprentice stared at the Grey Knights with wet eyes and tried to form words that belonged to him. No sound came out except a low, choral murmur from throats beyond reality. Voss advanced one pace. "They are compromised. They are victims. They are vectors. They are men. They are doors," Voss said, "and something is already looking through them." Vulkan's eyes burned low and dangerous. "I dragged them from slaughter, and the enemy permitted it." The words struck with cold precision. Vulkan's expression did not change, but his silence deepened. Voss could feel the Primarch's anger. It filled the space like furnace pressure, disciplined and immense, held back by will alone. A weaker warrior would have mistaken it for hesitation. Voss did not. Vulkan was not afraid to kill. That had been proven in blood across the district. The question was not whether he could do it. The question was whether he would accept the necessity before the necessity became catastrophe. Brother Librarian Severian limped forward through the ash, force staff clutched in both hands. His armor was scorched from the right against Mordath, and blood had dried in black trails beneath his helm seals. He stopped beside Voss and turned his psychic sight upon the survivors. Several screamed, not because Severian touched them, because the things inside them felt him looking. "They carry fragments," Severian said. Vulkan did not turn from Voss. "Explain." Voss answered before the librarian could. "Each bears a syllable of a true name, not all of one prince, pieces of the council, hidden beneath fear, bound to innocence. If they pass beyond the ward lines, the syllables scatter through the surviving population, through vox, through memory, through prayer. Every man who hears them becomes another carrier. Every carrier becomes an anchor. The gate spreads beyond this moon." The survivors stirred. Panic moved through them in a shuddering wave. "No!" one of the workers gasped. His voice was his own for a heartbeat. "No, Lord. I never spoke to them. I hid. We hid. We prayed. I did not betray." Then his jaw snapped open wide enough to tear the corners of his mouth, and another voice came through him, silk over razors. "Not all betrayal asks permission." The Grey Knights tightened their formation. Vulkan turned then and looked upon the man. The worker collapsed, clawing at his own throat. Blood ran between his fingers. His eyes begged for denial. Vulkan approached him and knelt. The Primarch's vast hand hovered over the man's face, not touching at first. The worker trembled beneath the shadow of that hand, as if beneath the judgment of a world. "Look at me," Vulkan said. The worker obeyed. Vulkan placed 2 fingers against the man's brow. The furnace chapel seemed to darken. Thane watched from the inner line, falchions lowered but ready. He saw the Primarch's eyes flare, not with battle fury now, but with something far more terrible. Perception. Recognition. Vulkan looked into the mortal soul before him, and the soul looked back, as a candle might look upon the sun. The worker began to weep. "Please," he whispered, "I do not want to open." Vulkan's jaw tightened. Inside the man's gaze, something moved.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
It was not possession in the crude manner of a demon riding flesh. It was subtler, crueler, a hook in the soul, a syllable buried under memory, a fragment wrapped in terror, prayer, and pain. The worker's own spirit was still there, but it was being eaten around the edges. Each breath fed the thing beneath him. Each heartbeat made the hidden name stronger. Vulkan withdrew his hand. The worker reached for him with shaking fingers. "Can you take it out?" For a long moment, the Primarch said nothing. "No," Vulkan said. The worker closed his eyes. Vulkan rose and moved to the next. A militia gunner, whose hands had been burned black around the grip of a las rifle, he no longer carried. A forge scribe whose tongue had been split into 3 strands by demonic whispering. An old machine tender with a rusted cog pendant fused into his chest. A boy whose brand still smoked, though the iron that made it was long gone. One by one, Vulkan examined them. One by one, he found the same truth. Souls intact enough to suffer. Souls marked deeply enough to doom everything they touched. Chaos had not stolen innocence. It had weaponized it. That was the genius of the warp. Not strength, not numbers, not even horror. It made virtue into a corridor for damnation. It hid plague inside charity. It made pity contagious. It took the hand extended to the drowning and turned it into a chain around the rescuer's throat. Mercy was a wound, and demons knew how to press their fingers into wounds. Voss watched Vulkan complete the last examination. He expected argument. He expected refusal hardened by grief. He expected the Primarch to demand time, some impossible right, some salamander stubbornness built upon the belief that no life should be abandoned while strength remained. Instead, Vulkan turned to the Grey Knights. "Lower your weapons." Voss did not move. "They cannot leave. They will not." The survivors understood before the Grey Knights did. A sound moved through them. Not the Ninefold voice, not demonic mockery, human terror. Men began to sob. Some prayed aloud, some stood straighter, hatred and despair making them brave in the final breaths of a life that had given them almost nothing. One man spat toward the dead vats and cursed the dark gods by every name he knew. Another begged Vulkan not to let the Silver Warriors take him. Vulkan looked at Voss. "I will do it." The brother captain's storm bolter remained raised. "That is unnecessary." "It is necessary. They are already condemned." "Not by you." Voss stepped closer. "Do not make ritual of infection." Vulkan's voice became iron drawn slow across stone. "I will not ask another son of the Emperor to carry what I can carry." No Grey Knight answered. Thane felt something shift in the chamber, something that no auspex could mark. The Grey Knights had expected the Primarch's compassion to weaken him. They had expected resistance, sentiment, a refusal that would force them to act against him or around him. Instead, Vulkan took the sin from their hands as if it were a burning brand and closed his fist around it. The first survivor was the worker who had asked if the fragment could be removed. Vulkan knelt before him again. The man shook uncontrollably. His lips moved around prayers, apologies, fragments of work cant, names of brothers long dead in other forge lines. Vulkan placed one hand upon his shoulder, not restraining him, not yet. "What is your name?" Vulkan asked. The man stared at him. "Hadron, Lord." "Hadron," Vulkan said. "You endured." The man began to cry harder. "I tried. I know." The Ninefold voice tried to rise from his throat. Vulkan's other hand closed around his skull. There was a sharp crack. Hadron died instantly. No bolt round, no flame, no spectacle. Vulkan lowered him gently to the glassed floor, as if laying a warrior upon a pyre. The next was the militia gunner. He saluted with 2 fingers, because the others had been burned away. "Do it fast," he said. Vulkan nodded. He did. The forge scribe screamed when the thing inside him tried to force words through his split tongue. Vulkan crushed his throat before the syllable completed. The old machine tender asked whether the Emperor would know he had not betrayed. Vulkan told him yes, and perhaps it was truth, perhaps mercy, perhaps both. Then he broke the man's neck with a movement so careful it seemed almost tender. The boy came last among the first cluster, and when Vulkan reached him, the chapel became unbearable in its silence. The boy could not have seen 15 standard years. His head was shaved, his eyes were sunken, his arms were thin from ration debt. A tool brand marked his shoulder, property of line primus, furnace maintenance cast. He looked up at Vulkan without understanding how something so immense could be kneeling before him. "I do not want to be brave," the boy said. Vulkan closed his eyes for 1 heartbeat. "You do not have to be." The boy swallowed. "Will it hurt?" "No." "Promise?" Vulkan opened his eyes. "I promise." The boy nodded once. Vulkan kept the promise. Thane looked away before he realized he had done so. Shame entered him a moment later, cold and precise. Grey Knights did not look away. Grey Knights witnessed corruption so that mankind would not have to. Yet he had turned his gaze from a mercy killing because the hand delivering it belonged to a demigod who seemed to suffer each death without allowing that suffering to slow him. Voss did not look away. Neither did Vulkan. The executions continued, one by one, name by name when names could be spoken, fast when the demonic voices tried to surface, gentle when gentleness was possible, brutal when brutality was required. Vulkan burned some whose bodies had already begun to change, reducing them to ash before the hidden syllables could crawl free. Others he killed with his hands, using only the exact force needed. The floor became marked with bodies laid in rows rather than heaped. It was a small distinction. In the Imperium, small distinctions were sometimes all that remained of dignity. With each death, the pressure beneath the moon weakened. Severian felt it first. The librarian staggered, then straightened, staff flaring with silver light. "The anchors are failing," he said. "The second seal is starving." Voss watched the last survivor die beneath Vulkan's hands. But something else is feeding. High above the corpse-starch basin, unseen by mortal eyes, the air grew fragrant for a single breath. Sweet, perfumed, wrong. In the cathedral beneath reality, Velisar the Exquisite leaned back upon his throne of nerve strings and smiled as though tasting a rare vintage. Cadrix of the perfumed lash shuddered with delight, his silks crawling across his pale limbs. They drank from the grief rising off Vulkan like heat from a forge. Not guilt alone, not hesitation. Grief disciplined into duty. Grief made sharper because it had not prevented the deed. To the servants of excess, such restraint was a banquet. Such sorrow was music. "Exquisite," whispered Velisar. "Again," breathed Cadrix. "Make him choose again." In the furnace chapel, Vulkan stood among the dead. No one spoke to him. Voss lowered his stormbolter at last. The Grey Knights did likewise, not in salute, not in pity, but in acknowledgement of a burden carried. Thane found himself staring at the Primarch's hands. They were wet with mortal blood. Not demon ichor, not the filth of the warp. Human blood. Loyal blood. Saved blood. Condemned blood. Vulkan looked down at it. For the first time since Thane had seen him, the Primarch seemed older than war. Then the moon screamed. The sound came from every furnace stack, every vox tower, every skull nailed to every prayer spire. It came from the dead vats, the ruined production lines, the split trenches, the orbital wreckage raining fire above. It came from below the crust and from the diseased sky. It was the cry of a ritual wounded, but not stopped. Voss's display filled with warning runes. Surface breach, Severian said. His voice had gone hollow. Multiple atmospheric tiers, warp translation on a planetary scale. The chapel roof peeled open, not collapsed, peeled, as if an invisible hand had taken the iron sky of the manufactorum and torn it back to reveal the heavens. Above Karen Vulkanis, the sky split from horizon to horizon. Behind the wound there was no void. There was only depth, red and green and violet and gold, layered hells pressing against the skin of reality. Shapes moved within it, first thousands, then millions, then numbers lost meaning. Wings, claws, horns, blades, mouths, banners of flayed light, chariots of bone, serpents made of teeth, plague hulks drifting like rotten moons, brass cavalry riding down invisible slopes, pale dancers turning in the spaces between lightning strikes. Billions of demonic silhouettes began to descend. They did not fall like an army. They settled over the world like a second atmosphere, and beneath their shadow, the dead forge moon began to breathe. The war for Karen Vulkanis ceased to resemble a campaign and became a planetary consumption. From orbit, the forge moon vanished beneath motion. The first demonic descent did not end when the sky tore. It thickened. It layered itself upon the dead world until the void above the moon looked less like emptiness and more like a second ocean trying to fall. Imperial Navy vessels that had survived the first slaughter emerged from the shadow of debris fields and burning station husks to make their last accounting. Lunar-class cruisers, battered monitors, armed pilgrim barges, system defense cutters, Mechanicus ordnance scows, and crippled escorts formed ragged lines in the black. Their prows turned sunward, their lance decks opened, their macro batteries elevated and began to speak with all the rage that remained in loyal machine spirits and dying crews. The void answered with apocalypse. Demonic swarms struck the fleet in layers. The first were winged things that moved like living spearheads, shrieking through flak storms and ramming themselves into bridge towers, sensor masts, and gun emplacements with suicidal hunger. Behind them came warp-born leviathans the size of destroyers, all jaws, chains, and burning eyes, hauling themselves through reality as if the fabric of the universe were meat to be bitten open. Plague hulks drifted amid the fighting, their hulls grown from rotting cathedral ships and tumorous iron. Their bombardment did not use shells. It shed disease. Clouds of corpse spores spread across the void like weather, clinging to adamantium, burrowing through armor seams, entering ventilation systems, growing lungs and teeth within sealed compartments. Naval broadsides hammered them all the same. Macro cannons fired until the barrels glowed white, and the loading crews burned where they stood from vented heat. Lance strikes stabbed through demonic clouds, vaporizing whole flotillas of lesser warp spawn in lines of hard blue fury. Torpedoes ran wild through the void, some guided true by prayer and disciplined cogitation, others seized by Tzinchian distortions and turned back into their own launch racks. One battlecruiser, its prow already torn open by a leviathan, put its remaining power into a final broadside that split a plague hulk from keel to spine. The vessel died in the same moment, its plasma core breached by boarding fiends erupting from within the engine sanctum. It went up in a sphere of white light full of silhouetted demons writhing as they burned. Below the fleet, the surface war was worse. Astra Militarum remnants held in fragments, not fronts. Companies became platoons. Platoons became nests of men, and guns crouched behind collapsed walls and tank hulks, firing until their fingers cramped, or their ammunition ran dry, or the demons reached them first. Skitari cohorts marched in lockstep through districts already overrun, galvanic fire cutting ordered lanes through impossible hordes, while their noospheres shrieked in machine panic under the pressure of warp intrusion. Titan engines strode across the crater basins and manufactorum belts. God machines wreathed in smoke, plasma blast guns turning whole swarms into incandescent rain. At least one warlord, Titan fought with both its void shields gone and half its carapace peeled away, its princeps locked in binary liturgy with a machine spirit too stubborn to die. It strode knee-deep through demon tides, stamping blood letters flat by the 100, until something vast from the upper atmosphere landed upon its shoulders and began to peel the command cathedral open like fruit. Cities vanished, not metaphorically. Entire hive clusters and labor arcologies simply ceased to exist beneath the pressure of the descent. Streets became red rivers full of screaming bodies and clawed limbs. Habstacks collapsed in rolling waves when demons tunneled through their foundations faster than demolition charges could be set. One district's cooling sea, once used to temper macro shell casings, reached boiling point under Nurgle's reign and began throwing up scalded corpses and plague things in the same eruption. Void shields flashed over fortress enclaves, held for a few breaths against the storm, then burst like glass under repeated impacts from warp artillery and the massed psychic pressure of the descending host. Still, the Imperium fought. It fought because the order to hold had been given. It fought because retreat on a forge moon had nowhere to go. It fought because a man in a trench or inside a tank or bound to a cogitator throne rarely had the luxury of choosing the shape of his death. The Grey Knights moved through that war like a blade through a body too enormous to comprehend the wound. Brother Captain Malachor Voss no longer tried to count the scale of the battle. Numbers ceased to carry meaning once the sky became an enemy continent, and every district of Karan Vulkanis was dying in a different language. He focused instead upon the shape of necessity. The demonic host had command nodes, not in the mortal sense of officers and relays, but as ritual anchors, summoning fonts, psychic nexuses, and screaming loti where the pressure of the warp thickened and directional will was imposed upon the madness. The Grey Knights struck those. They appeared inside collapsing cathedrals where choirs of flayed workers were being used as vox organs for Tzeentchian sorcery. They annihilated plague bells raised atop corpse towers before their tolling could curdle the blood of entire districts. They teleported into the shadow of demon engines large enough to shell hive walls and destroyed the bound cores within them with sanctified bladework and true name fragments spoken through clenched teeth. Everywhere else, billions of mortals and demons tore at each other across continents. The sons of Titan ignored the spectacle and went for the arteries. Vulkan was never far from the deepest cut. He did not command from a throne room. He did not rise above the battlefield to signal orders while lesser men died for his strategy. He walked at the point of greatest pressure, wherever the lines were bending hardest, wherever something impossible had to be broken now or not at all. He became a moving breach in the enemy line, a hole in the demonic advance through which mortal survivors fled. Titan engines turned, Skitarii rerouted, and Grey Knights could pass to reach the next ritual wound. Voss saw him at the fall of Bastion Kipra, where 6 companies of Cadian pattern guardsmen and 2 maniples of Skitarii had been crushed against their own bunker walls by a tide of brass demons. Vulkan entered the melee without slowing, hammer rising and falling in a brutal cadence that made blood letters vanish in showers of sparks and skulls. He seized one greater fiend by the leg and used its body to clear an avenue through lesser things, then planted himself in the breach and held while the surviving mortals stumbled past him, some burning, some limbless, some still trying to reload rifles with fingers that had already been bitten half away. He did not look back to see if they lived. He trusted the act of opening the path. That was enough. Yet the demons adapted. They learned quickly that Vulkan's strength alone could not be answered with strength alone. The warp was a mirror that lied with purpose. It offered not resistance, but relevance. So the enemy gave him things it had stolen from his past. The manufacturum avenues of Karan Vulkanis became the fire wastes of Nocturne without warning. Ash changed scent. Iron became volcanic stone. The sky blackened into the remembered glow of homeworld eruptions. Among the demon hordes walked giants in Green armor, sons of Vulkan long dead, their heraldry correct down to battle damage taken on worlds lost to record. Some came with their helms under one arm, faces known to the Primarch alone. Others wore the wounds of famous failures, the dead from Istvan, from the long wanderings, from nameless butcheries too old for any living chapter archive. They called to him in the voices of brothers burned into memory. Father, Lord of Drakes, you came too late. Vulkan killed them anyway, not because he knew they were false at once. Some struck him with all the force of recognition first. Voss saw that. He saw the half-heartbeat where the Primarch's wrath slowed, before an illusion wearing the face of one of his own dead sons. In that half-heartbeat, real demons leapt at him from three sides. Vulkan took an axe through the shoulder, a spear through the flank, and a screaming psychic barb across the mind. Then he crushed the false salamander's skull, and the illusion burst into blue fire and mocking laughter. Vulkan did not shout. He did not rage at the deceit. He simply became colder, and the blows he dealt afterward had an executioner's finality to them. The servants of Tzeentch made the war stranger still. Time failed in pockets across the battlefield. Squads of Skitarii disappeared in flashes of emerald light and returned as heaps of rusted skeletons. Guard platoons fired volleys into empty streets, then watched themselves die in those same streets 3 breaths later as the event caught up to them. Grey Knights teleported into ritual chambers and found the corpses of their own future selves already lying there, armor split, brains running down the walls, demon sigils carved into their tongues. Some of those futures were avoided, some were not. Brother Librarian Severian and the others of his conclave answered with psychic geometry. Voss had seen it before on smaller fields, but never at this scale. The librarians stood in the center of burning plazas, atop Titan parapets, inside the skeletal remains of churches whose congregations had been turned into mouth-lined pillars, and they carved shapes into reality with will alone. Hexagrammic corridors blazed into existence through the madness, straight lines and impossible angles of silver fire that denied the warp's appetite for contradiction. Within those corridors, time held still enough to trust. Distance obeyed. Teleportation could bite true. Storm bolter fire struck the target it was aimed at, rather than a memory of that target from a moment not yet happened. It cost the librarians dearly. Every corridor left one or more of them bleeding from the eyes, vomiting ash, or speaking in dead languages, until a brother struck them across the helm to force them back into themselves. Voss adapted as he always did. He used the corridors. He fed squads through them. He cut command nodes from the diseased body of the moon, while all around him the greater war drowned whole cities. He also watched Vulkan. At first, the Primarch had been a tool too vast for easy categorization. Strength, durability, force concentration, an allied anomaly to be directed away from contamination where possible and toward major manifestations where necessary. That understanding had been correct and incomplete. The truth was harder. Vulkan did not merely endure damage beyond mortal tolerance. Voss had seen Space Marines, Custodians, and even Brothers of Titan fight on through mutilation that would have slain men a dozen times over. Endurance of flesh was not unique. What Voss began to understand was that Vulkan endured meaning. He endured the psychological architecture of the enemy, the false brothers, the resurrected failures, the civilians used as weapons, the necessity of killing the innocent, the endless invitation to despair. The demons were not trying only to tear him apart. They were trying to make continuation impossible. They wanted fatigue of the spirit, fracture of identity, exhaustion not of body, but of purpose. Vulkan refused them, not cleanly, not untouched. Voss could see every cut the warp made, the slowing fraction before an illusion died, the tightening in the Primarch's jaw when a dead salamander spoke, the bleakness that entered his eyes after the furnace chapel. He was not immune. He was simply willing to carry injury farther than sanity should have allowed. That, Voss realized, was a different magnitude of strength. The realization came during the fall of the western relay fields. Brother Garen's Dread Knight had anchored the flank for nearly an hour standard, holding a convergence point where 3 summoning currents met amid the shattered relay towers. The war engine was black with soot and demon blood, one shoulder assembly hanging loose, one knee actuator sparking. Garen himself was still fighting like a saint made of hatred. His great sword rose and fell in killing arcs. His heavy cannon pulped swathes of lesser demons and blasted open larger ones for the infantry line behind him. Voss was 30 paces away, leading a paladin strike into a Tzeentchian choir nexus, when the air over the relay field split with wet laughter. A demon prince descended. Not one Voss had yet faced directly. Not Graxel, not the burned remains of Mordath. This one wore a body like a flayed angel stretched over butcher hooks, its limbs too long, its claws lacquered black, its mouth a vertical slit running from throat to brow. Wings of skin and gold wire folded around it as it landed upon Garen's Dread Knight from above. The impact drove the war engine to one knee. Before the pilot could recover, the demon's claws punched through the sarcophagus cage and tore the adamantium plating apart. Garen's scream hit the Vox net as static and blood. The demon prince ripped the cockpit open and plunged both hands inside. Metal shrieked. Hydraulic fluid sprayed. Warded seals burst. Then the demon hauled Brother Garen from the machine by the torso, the Grey Knight's legs still trapped in control interfaces and tearing free at the hips. Garen lived long enough to strike once with his gauntleted fist, cracking one of the demon's teeth. The prince laughed and opened its vertical mouth. It did not eat flesh first. It bit into the soul. Garen's body arched, a white silver flame, recognizable even to those without psychic gift as the sanctified essence of a Grey Knight, was dragged screaming from his mouth and eyes into the demon's maw. His flesh followed afterward, limp and emptied, cast aside in 2 wet pieces. The demon spread its wings and howled in triumph, Garen's final oath dissolving inside its throat. Every Grey Knight in range felt it, not by sentiment, by the cut in the psychic weather where a brother had been and was no longer. Even Voss staggered half a step as the loss passed through the Brotherhood link like a blade. Vulkan saw it too. The Primarch turned with a speed that belied his scale. He crossed the relay field through gunfire, warp fire, and raining debris, shouldering lesser demons aside hard enough to pulp them. The winged prince opened its mouth to laugh again and received Vulkan's hammerhead through the face. The strike caved in the skull and hurled the demon backward through 2 relay towers. It rose half-formed, head already knitting with obscene speed, and slashed at Vulkan with claws trailing black light. Vulkan caught one wrist, ripped the arm free, and beat the prince with it until the wings collapsed. The demon tried to escape by dissolving into shards of sound. Vulkan stamped it into reality, seized it by the throat, and dragged it through the burning wreck of Garen's Dread Knight. "This one was mine," he said. Then he forced the prince into the war engine's ruptured reactor core. The ensuing detonation was not large by battlefield standards. It was personal. Blue-white psychic flame and machine spirit agony consumed the demon from within. Garen's broken Dread Knight split apart, its last power cycling into a burst that erased the prince in a shriek of unmaking. When the fire died, nothing remained but molten adamantium, a few fragments of sanctified armor, and Vulkan standing amid the glow with his own plate scorched black. Voss reached him moments later. The Primarch looked down at the remains of the Dread Knight, and then at the endless war still unfolding beyond the relay fields. There was no time for ceremony, no time for recovery rites, no time even to gather every fragment of what had once been Brother Garen. "This battle strips the dead as quickly as the living," Voss said. Vulkan did not look at him. "Then we kill faster." Before Voss could answer, the world changed again. not through illusion, through presence. The storm over Karen Vulkanis drew inward, forming a spiral vast enough to cover continents. Beneath its eye, the battlefield darkened. Demons paused. Not all of them. Enough. The manner of the pause was unmistakable. Deference, anticipation, a court awaiting a king's speech. A voice rolled across the moon, magnified through vox towers, furnace mouths, orbital wreckage, and the lungs of the dying. Vulkan. Vorlash Akar did not appear in full. He manifested as enormity of outline and certainty of contempt, a silhouette wrought from black gold light, and the memory of imperial grandeur rotted from within. His face looked down from the storm eye and from every polished surface at once, reflected in visor lenses, pools of blood, broken machine screens, and the wet eyes of corpses. "You still believe this world is the field?" Vorlash said. "How loyal, how admirable, how small." Voss raised his blade. Librarians around him tensed, preparing wards against direct incursion. Vulkan looked up. "Show yourself." The storm laughed in a voice like triumphal processions echoing through tombs. "I have shown myself many times, in the empire your father built, in the cruelty it called necessity, in the pity it taught you to preserve, in the pain that follows you from world to world like a banner of fire. No, Drake, the moon is only the furnace." Lightning laced across the storm eye. For a heartbeat, Voss saw impossible shapes beyond it, not battlefields, memory, Nocturne's fire plains, Istvan's black sand, dead suns, broken cities, endless resurrection, endless failure. "The true battlefield," Vorlash said, and now the entire sky seemed to lean inward to hear him speak, "is your soul." The declaration did not end when Vorlash Akar's voice faded from the torn heavens. It entered Vulkan. The Primarch stood upon the western relay field, with demon blood cooling across his armor, the wreck of Brother Garen's dreadnought still glowing behind him, and the battlefield howling in every direction. The storm above Karen Vulkanis spiraled inward until its eye became a wound of black gold fire. Within that wound, something vast reached down without claw or hand. It touched not his flesh, not his armor, not the bones the Emperor had wrought to endure siege guns and monster talons. It touched the places pain had taught him to lock away. Vulkan staggered. The motion was small, a half step, a lowering of the hammerhead by the width of a mortal hand. To any man of the Imperial Guard, it would have meant nothing. To the Grey Knights, who measured corruption by tremor, breath, hesitation, and psychic pressure, it was the crack of a fortress wall. "Wards," Voss ordered. The librarians moved before the word fully left his vox grill. Severian and the remaining conclave formed a broken circle around the Primarch, boots grinding through ash and demon ichor. Their force staves struck the ground in unison. Silver lines flared out beneath their feet, sharp with hexagrammic geometry, crossing over basalt, wreckage, bone fragments, and the flattened remains of lesser demons. Purifiers closed behind them, chanting banishment phrases in voices that did not tremble. Paladins locked shields outward. Stormbolters rose toward the descending host. Vulkan did not hear them. The relay field vanished. He stood beneath a sky of black glass. Around him rose an arena built from every death that had failed to keep him. Its walls were not stone. They were moments. Betrayals mortared with blood. Failures hammered into shape and stacked high enough to blot out all light but fire. Nocturne burned to his left, its volcanoes vomiting ash across villages he had once sworn to protect. Istvan's black sands stretched to his right, thick with broken armor, shattered banners, and brothers dying beneath a sky that had forgotten mercy. Ahead stood chambers of torture, walls covered in blades, chains, hooks, and tools arranged with obsessive elegance. Behind him stood cities he had reached too late, their streets full of civilians whose bodies had been opened by war and whose eyes accused him without words. He had died in many ways. The arena remembered them all. He saw his own body impaled, burned, flensed, broken, shot, buried, drowned, torn apart by monsters, cast into impossible dark, and made whole again against his will. He saw himself wake in agony, again and again, dragging breath back into lungs that wanted only silence. He saw his hands chained. He saw skin peeled from his body by blades wielded with laughing patience. He heard the voice of the night haunter whispering from somewhere beyond the lamps of memory, all mockery and prophecy and cruel amusement. You endure because you have no choice. The arena breathed. The demon princes appeared upon the walls like judges in a court made from damnation. Graxhall's skull render came first, though banished, though broken, though hurled back into the warp by hammer and true name. Here, in the wound of the mind, his shape was still immense, still bleeding, still laughing through a skull half molten. Mordath bile-crowned bloomed beside him as a garden of rot growing from Vulkan's old scars. The Tzeentchian princes unfolded as mirrors and birds, and impossible equations written in flame. The Slaaneshi princes reclined upon chains made from grief, smiling with refined hunger. The remaining thrones gathered in shadow around Vorlash Akar, who stood at the arena's center, wearing imperial grandeur like a corpse wearing a crown. "You have been so diligent," Vorlash said, "so loyal, so obedient to suffering." Vulkan raised his hammer. It felt distant in his grasp, heavy not with metal, but with every choice that had ever brought it down. The arena floor became a village, nocturne, or the memory of it, or a lie wearing its warmth. Men ran through ashfall carrying children and tools and water skins, their eyes turned toward Vulkan in hope. Then demon fire swept through them. Flesh blackened, lungs burst, bodies struck the ground in smoking heaps. Vulkan moved to save them, but every step stretched the distance. The dying were always just beyond reach. A boy lifted a burned hand. A father shielded a corpse too small to have survived. Their mouths opened as one. You came too late. Vulkan's fingers tightened around the hammer haft until the grip cracked. The scene changed. He stood in the furnace chapel again. Workers knelt before him. Loyal men, innocent men. The boy with the tool brand looked up and asked whether it would hurt. Vulkan saw his own hand close, saw the neck break, saw the body lowered gently. Then the body looked up with dead eyes and spoke in Kadrix's velvet voice. Mercy is only cruelty that pauses to introduce itself. The dead rose around him, not as enemies, as witnesses. The survivors he had killed stood in rows, heads bent at wrong angles, throats crushed, skulls broken, eyes full of accusation, because chaos had learned the shape of truth well enough to make lies wear it convincingly. Vulkan drew breath. Pain entered him. It was not the pain of wounds. Wounds were honest. It was the pain of purpose turned against itself, of strength arriving too late, of compassion becoming a trigger mechanism in a demonic trap, of immortality making him survive not only the enemy's blades, but his own necessary sins. Vorlash walked among the dead with his hands clasped behind his back, like a commander inspecting troops. "Look at them," he said. "The ones you saved, the ones you killed. How thin the distinction became." "They were not yours," Vulkan said. "No, that is what made them useful." The arena shook as something struck Vulkan in real space. His body, still upon Karen Vulkanis, moved without his full mind behind it. Demons flooded the relay field. They came in red packs and green clouds, in mirrored flocks and pale blade-limbed choirs. Vulkan's eyes burned blankly behind his damaged helm. His hammer rose by instinct older than thought. He crushed the first demon into the basalt. His fist caved in the chest of the next. A brass hound leapt for his throat and found itself caught by the jaws, torn apart, and hurled in pieces into its kin. He fought like a forge engine given wrath, without speech, without pause, half his soul dragged into the arena, and half his body still refusing to die. Voss saw it, and understood the danger. The Primarch was killing everything that came near him, but his movements lacked judgment. The enemy sensed it. Lesser demons threw themselves at him to draw blows, while greater shapes circled at the edge of the ward light. A Tzeentchian knot began weaving a cage of reversed causality around his shadow. Slaaneshi things laughed from the smoke, tasting the grief bleeding from the psychic wound. Nurgle's flies clustered where Vulkan's blackened blood struck the ground. Cornete Pax howled for the honor of dying beneath his hammer, if it pulled him one heartbeat deeper from himself. "We enter," Voss said. Severian turned, his blood-streaked helm. "His psychic shadow is not stable. I did not ask if it was stable. It is a Primarch's torment. We may not return sane. Then return useful." Voss stepped into the hexagrammic circle before another brother could object. Thane followed him, then Malrek, then 2 paladins, whose names were already half erased from their own armor by warp heat. The librarians locked the geometry around them, not opening a gate into the warp, but cutting a wound into the reflection cast by Vulkan's soul. The rite was precise, dangerous, and close to blasphemy. Grey Knights did not enter another mind lightly. They did not offer comfort to the damned or sympathy to the wavering. They entered to sever corruption, anchor identity, and kill what should not be there. The world folded inward. Voss found himself standing upon black volcanic rock beneath a sky of embers. Vulkan's mind was a forge world, not a metaphor presented by the warp alone, but the shape his will gave to endurance. Oceans of fire stretched to every horizon, their waves rolling in molten gold and deep crimson. Black mountains rose from the flame seas, their peaks chained together by links large enough to bind continents. Each chain bore inscriptions of duty, oath, memory, regret. Great anvils stood upon the mountains, and upon each anvil lay a death he had endured, still hot, still being hammered flat into something that could be carried. Storms of ash moved between the peaks. Within those storms, Voss saw faces, battles, dead sons, murdered mortals, lost brothers, broken promises, worlds burning in silence. At the center of it all, beneath a mountain split open like a furnace heart, burned a single human flame. Small, impossible, unextinguished. Voss stared at it and felt something inside him recoil, not from corruption, from scale. The flame was not weakness hidden inside a god. It was the thing making the god endure, not grandeur, not genecraft, not immortality, that small refusal to let pain become indifference. The demon princes were trying to reach it. Their illusions poured down the mountainsides like black water. Dead salamanders climbed from ash. Prisoners from the furnace chapel crawled across bridges of bone. Torture chains descended from the sky. The voice of Vorlash echoed from every anvil. "Become the 10th throne, Vulkan." The offer rolled through the forge world like thunder. Rest from return, rest from grief, rest from the endless awakening into pain. Sit with us, and no blade will find you unwilling again. No civilian will beg beyond your reach. No son will die without purpose. No father will be absent. The Ninefold will become tenfold, and your suffering will finally have a crown. Vulkan stood before the central flame, enormous and wounded, his armor broken in a dozen places, his hands black with blood that was his and not his. The demonic visions pressed around him. Every failure had hands, every death had teeth. "You mistake pain for weakness," Vulkan said. His voice did not roar, it did not plead. It shook the mountains because it was true inside him. Pain is the anvil. Voss raised his blade. He understood then what had to be done. No comfort. Comfort would be poison in this place. No denial. The pain was real. The guilt was real. The dead were real in the only way memory needed. To tell Vulkan they did not matter would be to side with the demons. To tell him he had done no wrong would be a lie too fragile to survive contact with this furnace. The Grey Knights weaponized him instead. Voss began the chant. "Vulkan, Son of the Emperor. Thane took it up beside him, voice iron through the psychic storm. Lord of Drakes, Malrek joined, Primarch of the 18th. The paladins advanced into the illusions, blades cutting down false salamanders and demonic memories without hesitation. Hammer of Nocturne. Severian's voice entered from beyond the circle, echoing through the forge world like a bell struck beneath Titan's ice. The Unburned. Father of Suns. Breaker of Monsters. Bearer of Flame. Loyal unto death and beyond death. The titles were not praise. They were anchors, chains hammered into identity. Each one fastened Vulkan more tightly to himself. The demonic visions recoiled, not because titles alone held power, but because the Grey Knights spoke them without sentiment. They were not worshipping him. They were defining him as a weapon of the Emperor and denying the warp permission to rename him. Vorlash appeared before Voss, suddenly close, his noble demon face full of amused contempt. How eager you are to forge chains for your betters. Voss drove his sword through the apparition's chest. It smiled around the blade. Chains are useful, Voss said. The apparition burst into black gold flame, but its laughter remained. Vulkan moved. The Primarch lifted his hammer and struck the nearest anvil. The sound rang across the forge world. A vision of torture shattered. Chains fell from the sky, but Vulkan caught them, dragged them down, and laid them across the anvil. Another hammer blow flattened them into bands of burning iron. The murdered civilians surged toward him, mouths open in accusation, and borrowed demon voices. Vulkan did not deny them. He brought the hammer down, and their voices separated. The human grief sank into the flame. The demonic hooks twisted into metal. He hammered them flat. He made chains from them. The arena tried to reassert itself. Bone walls rose. Brass thrones formed in the ash. Mirrors opened, showing every death again, every failure again, every moment of helplessness polished to a killing edge. Vulkan turned toward them and began to work. Hammer blow by hammer blow, he changed the trap. The demon princes had built an arena from pain. Vulkan made it a forge. He seized Graxel's laughter and hammered it into a manacle. He took Mordath's false tenderness and folded it like diseased steel until it screamed clean. He caught the Slanishy sweetness, feeding on his grief, and quenched it in the molten sea. He drove Tsinchian riddles beneath his hammer until their branching futures collapsed into straight iron bars. The Grey Knights chanted faster, voices raw, their own souls scorched by standing so near the labor of a Primarch's will. Voss saw the central flame rise, not larger in size, brighter in meaning. The forge world answered. Black mountains rang with the rhythm of the hammer. Oceans of fire surged upward in tides. The chains of duty tightened, no longer binding Vulkan downward, but lashing the demonic visions in place. One by one, the false thrones cracked. Vorlash Akar appeared at the edge of the flame. For the first time, the undivided prince was not smiling. Vulkan looked at him. The Primarch's hammer stopped in mid-air. Between them passed no speech that Voss could hear. Something older and more dangerous moved there. Recognition, not of face, but of name. The demon had reached too deeply into Vulkan's soul, and in doing so had left a path back to itself. The forge seized that path. The central flame bent toward Vorlash, like a hunting beast scenting blood. The undivided prince withdrew. Too late. Vulkan reached into the black gold shadow he left behind and closed his hand around a burning thread of truth. The forge world vanished. Real space returned in violence. Vulkan stood upon the relay field, with demons piled around his knees and grey knights locked in a ward circle at his feet. His hammer was raised. His eyes were no longer distant. They were terrible, focused, and incandescent, with a wrath that had passed through grief and come out sharper. Voss stumbled back into his own body, armor alarms shrieking, blood running from his mouth inside his helm. Around him, Thane and the others returned one by one, shaken but alive. Severian collapsed to one knee, his force staff smoking. Vulkan turned toward the storm eye above Karen Vulkanis. In his mind, held like a burning brand in the fist of his soul, was the true name of Vorlash Akar. The true name burned in Vulkan's mind, and the moon answered as though a hammer had struck its hidden heart. Karen Vulkanis split open, not along fault lines alone, not through tectonic weakness or the stress fractures left by orbital fire. The forge moon opened according to ritual geometry, its continents dividing along lines cut by centuries of unseen preparation and a single night of perfected slaughter. Basalt plains tore apart. Manufacturum districts sank into gulfs of furnace light. Hive stacks twisted on their foundations, their windows blazing with the faces of the dead pressed against the glass from within. Rail lines snapped like tendons. Plasma conduits ruptured in chains of white explosions that ran from horizon to horizon. The moon did not die as a world dies. It unfolded, like a corpse under the hands of an anatomist. The Ninefold gate opened beneath it. Brother Captain Malachor Voss saw the first wound in reality form across the western relay fields. A line of black gold fire rose from the cracks in the basalt, then bent, then branched, shaping itself into an arch large enough to swallow a city. At once, 8 more arches answered across the surface, each one vast beyond mortal architecture, each one burning in a different color of damnation. Through them came not one hell, but 9. A brass warfield pressed into existence beyond the nearest gate, all iron skies and rivers of blood, where armies of red demons marched beneath banners stitched from screaming faces. War drums beat from towers of skulls. Axes fell in the distance forever. Beside it spread a plague marsh, green and swollen, its trees made of bone and bursting flesh, its waters thick with corpses that bloomed into smiling flowers. Bells tolled beneath the filth. Laughter came from the bubbles. A crystal labyrinth opened above a fallen manufactorum arcology, its walls turning through impossible angles, each surface filled with eyes that watched futures die unborn. Stairways climbed into each other, doors opened into mouths. Lightning wrote equations across the air and erased men from history before their bodies fell. Beyond another gate shimmered a palace of perfumed torment, all silk, ivory, polished nerve, and golden cages. Music drifted from it so sweetly that mortal soldiers tore off their own helmets to hear it better, then screamed as their ears flowered into bloody petals. The remaining wounds belonged to shadowed kingdoms without fixed shape, domains of chaos undivided, where ruined cathedrals marched on jointed legs and armies of traitor souls knelt before thrones made from broken imperial eagles. There, blasphemy wore the shape of empire. There, duty had been hollowed and filled with teeth. Voss understood then. So did Severian. So did every grey knight whose soul had survived long enough to recognize the architecture of damnation. The council had never needed to win every duel. Graxhol's banishment had fed the first seal. Mordath's destruction had blackened another. The executions in the furnace chapel had wounded the gate, yes, but grief had nourished the Slaaneshi thrones. The strike at the command nodes had delayed the descent, but every ritual cut had drawn Vulkan closer to the final wound. The demons had spent armies as counters in a calculation. Every victory had been permitted to become material. Every act of defiance had been folded back into the mechanism, and Vulkan had come. That was the final seal. The unbound flame stirred beneath the moon, drawn upward by his presence and the true name burning within him. It was loyal fire chained in a traitor machine, and its purity made the wound permanent. The gate did not only need corruption, corruption tore. It needed contradiction to hold the tear open. It needed a son of the Emperor standing in the heart of hell, carrying mercy, wrath, guilt, and endurance in equal measure. Voss tasted blood inside his helm. "Total Titan Protocol," he said. The words entered the Voxnet like a death sentence. Every Grey Knight heard them. Every surviving battle brother acknowledged without hesitation. No retreat, no witness, no preservation of secrecy through memory scouring alone. If the gate spread beyond Karen Vulkanis, the sector would become an open artery into the warp. Every surviving mortal outside secured ward lines was to be considered already dead, unless proven otherwise under blade, flame, and binding right. No mercy to the corrupted. No mercy to vessels attempting escape. No survival expected. No record beyond Titan, unless sealed by the highest authority and buried beneath oaths strong enough to kill the speaker. The mortal armies did not know the words, but they felt the change. Across the broken moon, imperial remnants fought in pockets of ruin. A few thousand survivors where billions had labored. Guard squads with rifles hot enough to burn hands through gloves. Skitarii cohorts reduced to limping clusters of red-robed machine men firing in perfect volleys while demon claws pulled them apart. Naval armsmen fighting beneath fallen cruiser ribs. Tank crews who had no tanks left, using las pistols and entrenching tools against things that had eaten armored companies. Priests who had lost their congregations and their sanity, still roaring hymns through throats shredded by ash. Titan engines, few and wounded, stood like dying gods amid cities reduced to bone dust. One Reaver, its head split open and its princeps long dead, continued to walk because its machine spirit refused the indignity of stopping while enemies remained before it. Billions of demons and corrupted mortals pressed against them. There was no front line now. Only pressure. Only drowning. The demon host poured from the 9 wounds in rolling masses that made distance meaningless. Bloodletters ran across the backs of plague walkers. Crystal beasts unfolded inside tank wrecks. Pale dancers moved through trenches, leaving men flayed without touching them. Fly swarms thickened into giants. Brass cavalry rode down Skitarii phalanxes and trampled them into red metal. Corrupted workers surged in continent-spanning mobs, their eyes burning with borrowed light, their mouths vomiting syllables that caused men to claw open their own faces to silence what they had heard. The Grey Knights gathered at the central wound. There were not many left, a handful of Terminators, paladins with armor cracked and script burned away, purifiers whose blades still shone despite the gore caking their arms, librarians half blinded by psychic backlash, Brother Justicar Arian Thane, one falchion broken, the other held low and ready, Severian, leaning upon his force staff, voice raw from rites that would have killed lesser psychers outright, Voss, his armor scored, his cloak burned to a black rag, his stormbolter dry until a serf with no lower jaw crawled through ash to offer another magazine and die at his feet. Vulkan stood before them. The Primarch looked upon the open gate and the 9 hells pressing through it. Fire crawled around his armor, not clean fire, not triumphant fire, but furnace light seen through smoke and blood. He bore wounds that had already begun to close, and scars that would outlast the moon. His hammer was blackened. His eyes were brighter than the ruptured sky. For one heartbeat, the surviving Grey Knights knelt, not in worship, not in surrender to legend, in recognition of command earned by deed at the edge of damnation. Voss knelt with them. The act lasted no longer than a breath. Then they rose to kill again. Voss stepped to Vulkan's side. Around them, demons gathered in such numbers that the plane itself vanished beneath claw, horn, blade, and diseased flesh. The gate's central arch pulsed, and from its depths came the laughter of the remaining council. "Name the target, Lord," Voss said. Vulkan did not look away from the 9 hells. All of them. Voss almost laughed. It came out as a cough of blood. "By your word." The Grey Knights moved, not as an army. They had never been an army in the mortal sense. They moved as consecrated murder, each squad cutting toward a gate edge, each librarian casting silver geometry into the air, each purifier turning demonic fog to screaming ash. Their purpose was not to hold ground. Ground no longer mattered. They needed to give Vulkan seconds. Seconds were now more precious than worlds. The unbound flame rose from beneath the surface. It burst through the broken plane in a column of white, green, and gold, shedding chains of black iron that cracked and dissolved as they fell. The flame did not roar. It judged in silence. Demons recoiled from its light. Corrupted mortals fell to their knees and burned from the inside, their borrowed voices shrieking out of them in black vapor. The relic hovered before Vulkan, as though recognizing the blood that had called it. Not obedient, not tame. It was no torch to be carried by any hand. It was a covenant made fire. Vulkan reached into it. His gauntlet blackened. The armor over his forearm glowed, split, and ran molten at the edges. Flesh beneath burned. He did not withdraw. He closed his hand around the heart of the relic and pulled. The unbound flame spread into his hammer. The weapon ignited. Vulkan struck the ground at the edge of the central gate. Fire raced outward in a ring. Where it touched demonic architecture, hell caught alight. Brass blackened. Plague marshes shriveled. Crystal labyrinths cracked and screamed as their futures burned in unison. Perfumed palace walls burst into colorless flame, and the music within turned to wet choking. Shadow kingdoms recoiled as the fire found the old lies dressed in imperial shapes and stripped them to ash. The demon's own portal became a furnace. They howled then, not in hunger, not in rage, in alarm. The remaining demon princes descended together. No more single champions stepping forth for pride. No more theatrical duels. The council came as a pack. Karvoth Red Testament strode from the brass warfield. His iron antlers hung with fresh grey knight helms, taken from futures not yet secured. His axe dragged sparks through the air. Ulvor the kindly ruin lumbered from the plague marsh, bells chiming inside his chest, each note making mortal flesh swell and split. Sarthul of the changing veil emerged from the crystal maze in a flock of bodies, each one a possible self, each one carrying a staff of blue fire. Itharak's mirror tongue followed as reflections before flesh, appearing in every visor lens before stepping into the world. Velisar the Exquisite walked from the palace of torment with blades grown from his wrists and a smile sharp enough to open skin. Cadrix came beside him, trailing silk and nerve cords, whispering promises that made wounded men beg for death before he touched them. Others of the shadowed thrones moved behind them, vast and indistinct, avatars of undivided malice. Above them all, Vorlash Akar manifested as a black gold king beneath a crown of broken aquillas. The pressure of their arrival drove men to their knees. Skitari optics burst. Guardsmen bled from their ears. A wounded paladin took one step forward, spoke a banishment word, and was torn apart by 3 different powers before the final syllable left his mouth. His armor remained standing for a moment after his flesh was gone, then collapsed empty. The princes did not laugh now. They hunted. Vulkan met their charge with the unbound flame burning across his hammer and his hand. Karvoth struck first. Vulkan caught the axe on the hammer haft, turned it aside, and drove his shoulder into the Cornate prince, hard enough to send him skidding back through a wave of bloodletters. Ulvor exhaled a plague wind that would have drowned a city in rot. Purifiers stepped into it and died chanting, their souls flaring white as their flesh sloughed from their bones, buying Vulkan the moment to burn the wind aside. Sarthul split into 9 futures at once, each one attacking from a different angle. Severian screamed and carved a hexagrammic corridor through the futures, forcing 8 to collapse. Vulkan's hammer crushed the 9th. Voss fought at the Primarch's flank and knew it could not last. No warrior could hold there forever, not even one wrought by the Emperor's own hand. The gate fed the princes fed the gate. Every death became heat, every wound became scripture. The unbound flame was burning the edges closed, but too slowly. The enemy understood. They no longer needed to defeat Vulkan in honor. They needed only to bury him beneath infinite malice until the flame guttered or the name in his mind slipped from focus. Vulkan understood as well. He looked once at Voss. The brother captain knew before he spoke. "No," Voss said. Vulkan's expression was calm, terrible, and almost gentle. "Yes, the gate will consume you. It may try. We require the true name. You have heard enough of it in my shadow." Voss's grip tightened around his sword. "Not enough. Then follow, son of Titan." Vulkan turned from him and walked toward the central gate, alone. Demons surged to stop him. They died in sheets. Hammer blows opened paths through their bodies. The unbound flame licked along the gate edges, widening around him like a wound cauterizing itself from within. The demon princes recoiled, then screamed commands, then threw themselves after him. Vulkan did not slow. He entered the Ninefold gate with the stride of a Primarch, walking into a furnace he intended to master. For a heartbeat, Voss saw him framed against all 9 hells. Green armor burning, hammer raised, a single figure between mankind and infinity. Then the gate swallowed him. Voss looked at the surviving Grey Knights. No one asked the order. No one needed it. The sons of Titan followed Vulkan into damnation. Inside the Ninefold gate, geography died. There was no forward. There was no down. There was no distance that remained faithful between one breath and the next. The sons of Titan crossed a threshold of burning reality and found themselves walking through 9 wars at once, each step carrying them from brass battlefield to plague mire, from mirrored labyrinth to perfumed execution hall, from shadow cathedral to a plain of screaming glass where the sky had teeth. The air did not enter the lungs cleanly. It argued with flesh. Every breath was a prayer forced through clenched teeth. Every wound was a mouth through which something from the warp tried to whisper itself into the blood. Brother Captain Malachor Voss landed knee-deep in ash that immediately became blood, then black water, then powdered bone. His autosenses screamed contradictory warnings: heat beyond tolerance, cold beyond void exposure, toxicity lethal, atmosphere absent, atmosphere sentient, gravity hostile, reality unstable. He silenced the lesser runes and kept the only ones that mattered: enemy, brother, objective. Vulkan burned ahead of them. The Primarch had entered the gate as a living flame, and the hells recoiled around him without yielding. The unbound flame blazed across his hammer and along his left arm, where the armor had melted to the shape of his gauntlet and fused with blackened flesh beneath. Each step he took left fireprints upon the impossible ground. Where his light touched the gate's inner architecture, demonic matter ignited, not vanishing, but screaming, as it remembered that it had no right to exist in the shape it had stolen. The Grey Knights followed in disciplined ruin. They were too few for the war around them. They had always been too few. That was why every motion mattered. Stormbolters barked in controlled bursts, the sound hard and sacred amid the shrieking unreality. Cybolt rounds punched through warp spawn and detonated in white-silver flashes, unmaking bodies that were not bodies and souls that had forgotten they were chains. Nemesis blades rose and fell with ritual precision. Halberds split demon skulls. Falchions carved through limbs and tongues and wings. Force swords pierced hearts that moved from one side of a chest to the other to avoid death, only to find true name fragments waiting on the blade edge. They did not shout battle cries. They chanted. Their voices came through the voxnet in overlapping cadences, cold and relentless. Names, bindings, denials, banishment canticles spoken in High Gothic, Titan cipher, and older tongues that made the lesser demons claw at their own ears. The chant did not comfort. It cut. It marked each manifestation with the language of its undoing, and gave the Grey Knights something real to stand upon when the ground tried to become memory. A demon with 3 faces and a belly full of hands burst from a wall of mirrors beside Voss. It screamed his dead brothers' names in voices stolen from Titan's crypts. Voss stepped inside its reach, drove his blade up beneath its jaw, and spoke the last syllable of its lesser name. The thing folded inward around the sword and became a smear of ash across his gauntlet. "Advance," he said. The word was unnecessary. His brothers were already moving. A corridor opened before them, not carved by architecture, but by violence. Vulkan made it. The Primarch met the first of the descending princes in a field of brass and burning skulls, where the ground was made from helmets taken in wars that had not yet happened. Carvoth Red Testament came for him with his iron antlers lowered and his axe raised in both hands. The Cornate prince moved with terrible discipline, every step a murder oath, every breath a count of blood owed. He did not roar like Graxel. He came silent, precise, and hateful. Their weapons met, and the brass field cracked to the horizon. Voss felt the shock through his boots and teeth. Lesser demons nearby burst apart from the pressure of the impact. Vulkan turned the axe aside and struck Carvoth in the face with his bare left hand. The unbound flame burned into the demon's skull, eating through brass and bone and hatred. Carvoth answered by driving a knee into Vulkan's wounded chest and tearing open the half-sealed plate. Blackened blood spilled again, heavy and smoking. The prince lifted his axe for the killing blow. 3 grey knights fired into the joint of the demon's shoulder. Severian spoke a binding phrase that made Carvoth's arm hesitate for the span of a heartbeat. A heartbeat was enough for Vulkan. He hooked his hammer behind Carvoth's knee, shattered the joint, and brought the demon down. Then he seized one iron antler and tore it free with a wet metallic crack. Carvoth finally roared. Vulkan drove the broken antler through the demon's throat, pinned him to the brass ground, and struck the haft with his hammer. The antler sank like a nail. The Cornate prince's body convulsed as the grey knight's chant wrapped around him. Blood sworn, skull chained, Carvoth, Carvoth, Carvoth. Vulkan's next blow crushed the demon's head into the ground and banished him in a burst of red fire that rained skull fragments across the field. The brass warfield became a crystal maze before the sparks had settled. Sarthul of the Changing Veil had been waiting inside the transition. The Tzinchian prince unfolded into existence as 1,000 futures. Vulkan stood suddenly surrounded by versions of the same enemy, each one striking from a different tomorrow. In one future, Sarthul's staff pierced Vulkan's eye. In another, his talons opened the Primarch's throat. In another, the ground swallowed Vulkan into a maze of mirrors, where every reflection accused him of failure. In another, Voss died before he could give the order that saved his brothers. In another, the unbound flame guttered. In another, the Ninefold gate became permanent. In another, Vulkan knelt before a 10th throne. Voss saw too many outcomes at once. His mind buckled under the weight of them. Blood filled his helm. His sight blurred. Severian screamed over the Vox, not in fear, but in effort, and drove his force-staff into the impossible ground. Hexagrammic lines snapped outward, silver geometry cutting through the branching futures like wire through flesh. "Select," Severian rasped. "Lord Vulkan, select." Vulkan stood at the center of the multiplying futures, motionless for one terrible instant. Then he turned. Not toward the loudest future, not toward the strongest, toward the one that flinched. There, amid the 1,000 possibilities, one Sarthul had taken half a step back. One had hidden behind the certainty of survival. One future contained the truth of the prince's continued existence. Vulkan killed that one. He hurled his hammer, not through space, but through decision. The weapon crossed the impossible maze in a line too direct for sorcery to bend. It struck the surviving future in the chest and burst through the back of it in a flare of forge fire. The 1,000 other Sarthuls screamed as one and collapsed into the wounded body. Vulkan was already there when the prince became singular again. He caught the demon by its avian throat and drove the burning hammerhead through its face. Feathers of glass exploded outward. The maze shattered. Pieces of unborn time rained down and dissolved against the Grey Knight's wards. The next hell smelled sweet. That was the first warning. The perfume entered through helm seals, through armor joints, through memory. It carried incense, blood, old victories, flesh, grief, ash after rain on Nocturne, oil from a father's forge, the sound of sons laughing before war took them, and the impossible promise that nothing needed to hurt anymore. The ground became polished ivory veined with nerves. Music trembled through the air, exquisite and obscene. The wounded among the grey knights stiffened as pain became pleasure, and pleasure became a hook. Velisar the Exquisite drifted toward Vulkan across the palace floor. He did not charge. He danced without appearing to move. Blades curved from his wrists, each one thin enough to divide sensation from thought. His beauty was weaponized cruelty, perfect in proportion, unbearable in meaning. Behind him, hanging cages sang with the voices of prisoners who had begged for death until death became too plain a request. Poor flame, Velisar whispered, still burning, still denying, still mistaking endurance for virtue. He lifted one hand, and grief became sound. Vulkan saw the furnace chapel again. The boy, the broken promise that had still been mercy, the loyal workers in rows, dead salamanders, Nocturne burning, Istvan, torture, endless return, every sorrow sharpened into music and driven into him through the ears, eyes, scars, and soul. Around him, the grey knights faltered. One purifier dropped to one knee, his chant becoming a strangled rasp as the song found a wound in him and tried to widen it into worship. Thane seized the brother by the gorget and struck his helm hard enough to crack the lens, breaking the trance. Vulkan did not answer the song. He walked through it in silence. Velisar smiled wider and struck. His wrist blades opened Vulkan's cheek, his shoulder, his already broken chest plate. Each cut carried sensation meant to unmake discipline. Agony, ecstasy, regret, longing, every nerve turned traitor at once. Vulkan caught the next blade in his bare hand. It sank through his palm and emerged from the back in a burst of black blood. He closed his fingers around it. Velisar's smile faded. Vulkan pulled him close and gripped his throat. The Slaneshi prince tried to sing. Vulkan squeezed. The first note emerged as silver sweetness, the second as a wet rasp. The third did not come at all. Vulkan lifted him from the ivory floor and crushed harder until the elegant neck collapsed under his gauntlet. Velisar clawed at him, blades scraping sparks from Drake-forged armor, feet kicking in perfect, useless rhythm. Vulkan slammed him down and placed one boot upon his chest. Still silent, the Primarch tore the demon's throat out and burned the song in his fist. The palace screamed as Velisar dissolved. A plague wind swallowed the scream. Ulvor the kindly ruin came from the green murk, with arms spread wide. He was vast beyond bulk, a mountain of swollen flesh and ruptured armor, bells chiming inside his ribcage, his face split in an expression of paternal sorrow. Maggots poured from his eyes like tears. His voice rolled warm and rotten across the field. "Enough, child. Enough pain. Come here. Rest. Let me hold what hurts." He embraced Vulkan. The demon's arms closed around the Primarch, like collapsing fortress gates. Armor corroded where the Plague Prince touched it. Flesh beneath blackened. Spores entered every wound. The bells inside Ulvor's chest rang a lullaby that made dying seem kind and surrender seem wise. His bloated hands stroked Vulkan's back with obscene tenderness. "You have carried too much," Ulvor murmured. "Put it down." Vulkan's head lowered. For a heartbeat, Voss thought the Primarch had been smothered beneath rot and sorrow. Then fire appeared between Ulvor's fingers. It began as threads, then lines, then a furnace. Vulkan pushed his arms outward. Ulvor's embrace split. The bloated limbs burned from within, skin tightening, blistering, then sloughing away in rivers of black pus that turned to ash before falling. The Plague Prince wailed, still trying to hold him, still whispering love through a mouth full of flies. Vulkan drove him backward step by step into a wall of sanctified flame kindled by the purifier's chant and the unbound flame's wrath. "You are not rest," Vulkan said. "You are surrender wearing a smile." He struck Ulvor with his hammer. The first blow burst the bells in the demon's chest. The second opened his belly and released a flood of diseased spirits that the grey knights burned mid-flight. The third drove him into the flame, and the flame took him, climbing through his rotten mass until the paternal face cracked open around a scream that became ash. Then Karvoth's banished fury echoed back through the gate. Not Karvoth, something of him. A last murder oath given shape by the gate's hunger. It came as an axe blow from the side, summoned through a tear in the brass hell, aimed not at Vulkan, but at Voss. The brother captain saw it too late. His blade was high, his footing was wrong, his armor was cracked. The axe carried enough force to split him from helm to groin and cast his soul into the red road beyond the gate. He began the counter, knowing it would fail. Vulkan stepped between them. The axe struck the Primarch across the back. It tore through armor, drake hide, and flesh, opening him in a line from shoulder to hip. The force drove Vulkan to one knee. Blood hit the ground in a steaming sheet. Voss staggered beneath the pressure of the blow that had not reached him, and saw the wound before he saw the sacrifice. "Vulkan," he said. The Primarch rose, slowly. The axe manifestation recoiled, as if unable to comprehend that anything could stand after receiving the death meant for another. Vulkan turned, caught the returning weapon with his wounded hand, and crushed the haft until the murder oath embedded in it snapped. The echo burst apart. The opening came then. Vorlash Akar stood beyond the dying princes, framed by shadowed cathedrals and broken aquillas. He had not joined the pack fully. He had watched. He had calculated. He had waited for Vulkan to spend himself against the others, for the grey knights to bleed their strength into rites, for the unbound flame to burn so hot it threatened the hand that held it. Voss saw him, more than saw. The true name Vulkan had carried inside his soul had marked the air around Vorlash, leaving burning scars in reality. Voss had heard enough within the Primarch's shadow. Fragments, edges, the shape of the syllables. Not a name meant for mortal speech, not even meant for Astartes' speech. A name that would punish the tongue, the mind, and the soul that carried it into sound. Voss removed his helm. The air of the gate struck his face like knives. Blood ran from his eyes immediately, his sight filled with 9 colors of damnation. "Brother Captain," Severian warned, voice distant through static. Voss ignored him. Vorlash turned. His smile returned. "Careful, little silver lock. Some doors open both ways." Voss began to speak the true name. The first syllable broke his left eye. It burst inside the socket, not outward, but inward, filling his skull with white fire. He kept speaking. The second syllable burned the nerves behind his right eye, turning sight into ash. The world vanished into pain and afterimage. He tasted iron, incense, and his own soul scorching at the edges. The third syllable tore every false reflection from Vorlash's armor. The fourth made the Shadow Kingdoms shudder. The fifth was not a sound, but a wound spoken through breath. Voss gave it voice anyway. Vorlash screamed, not from fear, from recognition. The undivided prince's hidden grandeur peeled away. The mockery of imperial nobility burned from him in strips. Beneath it was not a king, not a general, not a fallen hero with tragic dignity. Beneath it was hunger wearing stolen ceremony, a thing that had betrayed until betrayal became its spine, a parasite crowned with the memories of command. Voss fell to one knee, blind, blood pouring from empty eyes. He forced the final syllable out. The name struck Vorlash like a chain around the throat. Vulkan moved. Wounded, burning, half-ruined, he crossed the distance between them with the inevitability of an anvil falling from heaven. Vorlash tried to speak. Vulkan hit him before the first lie formed. The hammer blow shattered the demon's jaw and drove him backward into the shadow cathedral behind him. Pillars made from broken eagles collapsed. Thrones of blasphemy cracked. Vorlash raised a blade of black gold light and stabbed Vulkan through the abdomen. Vulkan stepped closer along the blade. He caught Vorlash by the crown of horns and forced him down. Voss, blind upon the burning ground, heard every impact. Vulkan raised the hammer and brought it down upon the demon's skull. At each blow, Voss spoke a fragment of the true name again, though his voice had become ruined meat. The name entered the cracks Vulkan made. Hammer and word became one act, blow after blow, syllable after syllable. The demon's head split, reformed, split again, tried to become 100 faces, tried to become old imperial commanders, dead brothers, a father's voice, a son's plea. Vulkan hammered through all of them. He hammered the true name into Vorlashakar's skull, like a nail into a coffin. The final strike drove the name home. Vorlash's body arched. Black gold light burst from every fracture. His scream filled all 9 hells, and for a moment, every demon within the gate heard its own ending hidden inside that sound. The undivided prince collapsed inward, crown first, then face, then armor, then shadow, dragged by the true name into the depth that had birthed him. The council died screaming, or was banished screaming. In the warp, the distinction was a mercy granted only to fools. The 9 hells recoiled, brass fields cracked apart, plague marshes dried into grey dust, crystal labyrinths folded in on themselves, cutting their own futures to ribbons. Palaces of torment lost their music and became meat rotting in silence. Shadowed kingdoms fell to their knees and burned. The grey knights stood among the collapsing impossible, wounded, blind, dying, victorious. Then the gate spoke without a voice. It demanded payment. The Ninefold gate had been opened with blood, contradiction, relic fire, and the presence of a Primarch. It could be broken, it could be sealed. But its collapsing edges were too vast, too hungry, too deeply hooked into Karen Vulkanis and the wounded Vale. If released, they would tear wider in their death throes and spill everything they contained into real space. Someone had to hold them, not a mortal, not a grey knight, not even a brotherhood. A living god had to hold the gate shut from the inside. The Ninefold gate did not close like a door. It fought. It had been made from slaughter on a scale that defied mourning, from prayers twisted into hooks, from demonic ambition, from the deaths of princes, from the grief of a Primarch, and from the stolen purity of a relic meant for forge, oath, and protection. Now that its masters were broken, the gate thrashed against unmaking. It tore at itself and at everything around it. Brass battlefields folded into plague marshes. Crystal labyrinths shattered into perfumed torture halls. Shadow kingdoms collapsed through one another, their cathedrals screaming as their foundations became teeth. The 9 hells were dying inward, and in their death, they tried to drag real space after them. Vulkan held them apart. He stood at the heart of the collapsing gate, with both hands braced against forces no mortal eye could have named. One hand pressed into a wall of brass skulls that was also a horizon of war. The other sank into a curtain of black gold shadow filled with the faces of dead kings and traitor saints. His boots were planted upon ground that changed from bone to glass to burning metal beneath him, each transformation breaking against the impossible weight of his will. His armor was ruined. His breastplate hung open in places, blackened flesh visible beneath. His back was split by the axe wound meant for Voss. His left arm burned to the elbow with the unbound flame, not held now but fused into him, fire and gene wrought flesh, and ancient relic wrath bound together in one terrible purpose. The gate pushed. Vulkan pushed back. Around him, the broken remnants of the Ninefold Council did not lie like corpses, because demons did not grant the living such honest endings. They burned, crawled, dissolved, reformed, and screamed in pieces. Graxhul's shattered skulls rolled through rivers of blood, each one trying to bite. Mordath's plague garden withered and bloomed again in patches of diseased light. Velisar's severed song fluttered in the air like strips of skin. Sarthel's dead futures twitched as glass birds with snapped wings. Vorlash Akar's black gold crown lay cracked at Vulkan's feet, whispering offers through the fractures. Voss could not see any of it. His eyes were gone. Where sight had been, there was pain, heat, and the after-image of Vorlash's true name burned into the meat of his mind. He stood because two brothers held him upright, Brother Justicar Arian Thane at one side, and Brother Malrek at the other. Both were wounded. Thane's left pauldron was missing, his armor beneath flayed open to the black body glove and bleeding flesh. Malrek's helm had been crushed inward over one eye, and his remaining falchion shook in his gauntlet from nerve damage or exhaustion. Neither released the brother captain. Voss still faced Vulkan by instinct. "We do not abandon you," he said. His voice was ruined from speaking the true name. It emerged through blood, broken teeth, and stubbornness. Vulkan did not turn. If he had moved even a fraction wrongly, the gate would have used the motion to split him open and pour hell through the wound he left. "You will withdraw," Vulkan said. The pressure of the gate made every word sound as though it had been hammered through stone. "No." The answer came before Voss could command himself to restraint. It was not tactical. It was not pure. It was the refusal of a warrior who had watched a demigod carry burdens no doctrine had prepared him to witness. The grey knights around him tightened formation. What remained of them stood in a broken crescent before the path back to real space. Terminators with armor cracked and smoking, purifiers whose voices had been burned down to whispers, but who still mouthed litanies through bleeding lips. Librarians leaning on force staves, their psychic hoods guttering. Paladins holding the line against lesser demons, still clawing from the collapsing walls. Behind them, serfs and rescued mortal assets were gone, left beyond the gate under quarantine, or already dead. Here there were only the sons of Titan, their dead, their wounded, and the impossible shape of Vulkan holding damnation still. The unbound flame burned between them. Vulkan tore a portion of it from his own arm. The act made him bow his head for the first time, not in defeat, in pain accepted without theatre. White-green fire peeled away from his fused gauntlet in strands, screaming like metal cooling too quickly. He shaped it with his hand, compressing the relic's heart into a burning ember caged by his own blood. The ember hovered in the air, bright enough that even Voss felt it as sightless dawn against his ruined face. "Take it," Vulkan said. Severian staggered forward and raised a warded reliquary box, its hinges already melting, its silver script flaring as if alive. Thane guided the ember into it with his broken falchion held across his chest like a ritual bar. The reliquary sealed around the fragment of the unbound flame and shrieked as the machine spirit inside accepted pain as duty. Voss shook free of Thane's support. "You cannot seal this alone." "No," Vulkan said, "not alone." The broken demon remains writhed around him, the shattered princes, the court of ascended filth reduced to fuel. Vulkan's hands closed. Chains of fire burst from the ground and wrapped around the remnants of the Nine. They bit into Graxul's skull fragments, into Mordath's rotting bulk, into the glass birds of Sarthel's futures, into Velisar's severed music, into Ulvor's swollen ruin, into Karvoth's broken oath, into Itherax's mirrors, into Kadrix's crawling silks, and into the black gold shadow of Vorlash Akar. The chains drew tight. The demon remnants screamed as Vulkan dragged them inward, not as trophies, not as slain kings, but as kindling. Voss reached for him blindly. "Vulkan." At last, the Primarch looked back. Voss could not see the face. He felt the heat of it. He felt the weight of the presence, the grief, the wrath, the endurance that had outlasted death more times than sane history could bear. "You are not here to save legends," Vulkan said. "You are here to save mankind." The words ended the argument, not because Voss accepted them willingly, because they were true. He bowed his head, and it cost him more than blood. "Withdraw," Voss ordered. The Grey Knights obeyed with perfect discipline. They retreated through hell while carrying their dead, their wounded, the reliquary, and their shame. No brother ran. No brother looked back without purpose. Paladins walked backward with blades raised, cutting down warp spawn that tried to follow. Purifiers dragged the bodies of fallen brothers by armor harness and broken limbs, chanting the names of the dead, so no demon could claim them in the confusion. Thane carried one brother, whose legs had been eaten by a mirror beast. The wounded Grey Knight still fired his stormbolter over Thane's shoulder, until his last magazine clicked empty. Severian held the path open with a psychic corridor so thin it sliced the souls of those who walked it. Voss stumbled at the center, blind and bleeding, one hand upon the reliquary containing the ember of the unbound flame, the other gripping his sword, though he could no longer see what he might need to kill. Behind them, Vulkan became a silhouette against apocalypse. His final visible act was monstrous and holy. He dragged the burning corpses of the 9 demon princes into the heart of the gate. The chains screamed. The princes screamed louder. Their remains fought him with claws of memory, disease, seduction, rage, prophecy, and imperial mockery. Vulkan did not answer any of them. He hauled them into the collapsing center, where the unbound flame still burned through his body. His ruined armor split wider under the pressure. Fire poured from his wounds. His hammer rose once, its head blazing with the relic's last uncontained wrath. He struck the heart of the gate. The unbound flame detonated. The Grey Knights emerged into real space as the world split behind them. Karen Vulkanis convulsed beneath a sky full of fire. The central gate collapsed inward, dragging the other 8 wounds with it. Across the moon, the 9 hells were torn from the crust in burning sheets. Demon hosts vanished in storms of ash and broken light. Corrupted manufactorums folded into their own foundations. The plague ocean's flash boiled. Crystal labyrinths shattered into harmless dust that cut the throats of the cultists who had birthed them. Perfumed palaces became smoke. Brass warfields sank into magma. Shadow cathedrals fell through, themselves, taking their worshippers with them. Then, the orbital bombardment began. The surviving Imperial Navy vessels and defense platforms, under Grey Knight cipher authority, turned every weapon still capable of firing upon the moon. Lance beams speared through storm clouds and struck manufactorum continents. Cyclonic charges were not authorized. The gate's collapse made such excess a danger even greater than fire. Instead, they used methodical annihilation. Macro shells fell by the thousands. Plasma warheads turned furnace belts into white scars. Bombardment cannons shattered corrupted hive stacks. Defense lasers cut trenches across ritual geometry until the symbols broke and bled magma. The moon cracked. Its corrupted crust collapsed inward around the wound Vulkan had sealed. Entire districts slid into molten depths. Prayer towers of skulls fell like forests in a hurricane. The dead were buried beneath ash, iron, and glass. The few living screamed until Medici sedation, shock, or Grey Knight order ended the sound. Billions were dead. The accounting would never be honest. The survivors were gathered under warded quarantine fields. Some were mind-scoured until their own names became inaccessible ruins. Some were shipped in sealed holds to inquisitorial stations from which no message would ever return. Some were executed quietly when infection markers appeared beneath the skin or in the cadence of their prayers. Loyal service did not guarantee survival. Innocence did not guarantee trust. On Karen Vulkanis, innocence had already been used as a weapon once. The Imperium did not permit the same blade to be drawn twice. The mortal commanders who had seen too much vanished from record. The Skitarii data cores were purged, sanctified, purged again, and then melted. The naval logs were rewritten. The names of regiments that had died holding the line were filed under unrelated campaigns, their sacrifice dispersed into bureaucratic fog. The dead could keep their honor only if the truth of their deaths was buried with them. Voss recorded the event from within a sealed chamber aboard the Argent Edict, 3 days after the bombardment ceased. He wore no helm. His eyes were covered by a strip of black wardcloth marked with silver script. Apothecaries had sealed the ruined sockets, but they had not restored sight. Some wounds were not meant to be healed quickly. Some were useful as reminders. Before him stood a Titan archive reliquary, its memory core isolated from every ship system, guarded by kill protocols and prayer locks. The ember of the unbound flame rested in a containment shrine behind him, dimmed but alive. Voss spoke the title first. The Ninefold Suppression. The archive accepted the designation with a low chime. He gave the account without embellishment. Demonic Council, 9 thrones, Relic Compromise, Grey Knight Intervention, Vulkan's Manifestation, Strategic Necessity, Casualty Scale, True Name Deployment, Gate Closure, Primarch Status Unknown. When he reached the final part, his voice paused, only for a breath. Then he continued. Official report to external Imperial authorities will state that a demonic incursion on Karen Vulkanis was contained by Grey Knight's intervention. No further disclosure is warranted. Surviving witnesses processed under established protocols. All records sealed under Titan priority, by my hand and by the Emperor's will. He pressed his thumb to the archive seal. Blood was required. He gave it. The reliquary locked. Far below, Karen Vulkanis cooled. What remained of the Forge Moon was a broken sphere of ash, glass, and black stone. Its manufactorums were gone. Its oceans of waste metal had hardened into dead mirrors. Its cities were burial strata beneath bombardment scars. No bells rang, no machine choirs sang, no labor horns called men to their shifts. Only ash moved, wandering across the surface in storms thin enough to reveal the bones of industry beneath. Deep beneath the cooling stone, where the central gate had been, there was black glass. In that glass, burned deeper than any lance strike and larger than a gunship, was the mark of a hand. 5 fingers spread wide, palm pressed down. The impression of impossible strength holding shut the mouth of hell. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, somewhere in the dark beneath the glass, a forge fire opened its eye. A voice whispered from within the ember glow, low as thunder heard. Through mountains, weary as iron, unbroken as oath, I endure.